shit midway.
Do it.
We may stop anyways.
Am I on camera still?
Yes.
Okay. It's
Being on camera like a dirt.
I'm glad I didn't move. Like say something. Yeah. Give myself a pep talk.
What's up, guys, and welcome to Straight from the Chest podcast. My name is Justin Groth, and I'm your host on this personal development and growth podcast. Listen, if you're new to the show, I just want to welcome you. I want to thank you for being here. And if this is your second, 50th, or 150th time tuning back in, thank you for your continued listenership, support of the podcast. It means a lot to me. Listen, if you haven't yet subscribed to the YouTube, please do so, Straight from the Chest. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Apple or Spotify, please do so as well. We're anywhere that there's podcasts, we are there. And so again, please show your love and continue support of the podcast by doing so, and as well as extend it to somebody who you feel would value from it. Link it to your Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Just get this motherfucker out there. That's all I ask. That's the only thing I ask in return from you, and I appreciate it very much. So thank you in advance. So without further ado, I brought on a real good friend of mine, Lisa. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Justin. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, so it's been some time. It been a lot of time, and my phone keeps vibrating. It's pissing me off already. So what's been up? Just tell me. Talk to me.
Oh boy, what's been up? It's been a hell of a time the last few years, I know, for everybody with the pandemic. As a person who is immunocompromised, it's been especially challenging because I've had a lot of fear and worry about, getting sick and all those kind of things. And a lot of things have changed in my life as a result of the whole move to work from home, health issues, lots of stuff has been going on. And so it's been a really challenging time, but it's also surprisingly, although on the outside, it's probably the most chaotic my life has ever felt, in that I'm certainly not living what I thought I'd be living at this time in my life. I also have the most peace I've ever had. And that says a lot about what personal growth is all about. And that's why I believe in what you do. You've always been that way. And that's how I connected with you to begin with.
I appreciate that. We met how many years ago?
Almost 4?
I think so. You're right.
I don't know. Somewhere 4 years.
Yeah,
4.
I want to
It's
say
gotta be
4.
more than that.
I think
maybe even 5.
Yeah, I don't know. It's 4 or 5.
It's been a minute.
Okay, just want to make sure that kept recording. I didn't. I have nightmares about this shit where
Or it just
my
stops.
my recording just stops, and I'm
And
like,
you're
and I
like-
lose fucking everything. So, anyways,
Has it ever
I was
happened?
once.
Okay.
And so that's the reason why I have that tick. I'll look
Okay.
back so for people that aren't viewing this and they're listening, that's what sometimes I'll end up doing. I'll end up turning my head to make sure that the file is still recording, because in the event that we lose anything, especially shit you're gonna say, that would be a travesty. So
Well, and I got to tell you, if there's a possibility something weird could go wrong, I'm here, so it could happen. So definitely keep checking.
I'm sure we're good. So, okay. So we met, I don't know, 10 million years ago. And you called in to obviously enlist in some personal training. Mm-hmm. And, obviously in my job, it's personal first before it's training. And I've always believed in that. And I always continue to believe in that. That's what I will push. That's the rhetoric that I will push to anybody that wants to be a trainer, etc. If you don't have the personal side down, you're not going to retain anybody. Doesn't matter what kind of credentials you have, etc., etc. That's a different podcast. We won't talk about that. However, when you came, there was an immediate connection between you and I. But I do remember this though, when, one thing is very present with you. You're a strong presence. You can be intimidating to a lot of people. And the thing is that is definitely, I was aware of that in the forefront by interfacing with you. That's something that I picked up. But the thing about you was that, and this is the thing I've always admired about you, is that you're so well spoken and you have this laundry list vocabulary. And the thing that most people would be intimidated by, I admired about you. And
Thank you.
And it maybe perhaps because I wasn't trying to date you, but nonetheless, it was like, you just emit, and I've told you this multiple times, you emit this aura of badassery, and it's very atypical with lawyers. And that's obviously what you do, what you were, in part doing it or immersed in the time. But it fits your identity like to a T. The one thing that I did see about you though as well was that you didn't believe it to the point that I was convinced. Like, I was convinced that this is your personality. This is what you're good at. You're very good at this. Why don't you do more of that? And I've told a lot of people that about, whatever is particular with them. And the same goes for you. I never really understood why you didn't go full-fledged into that. I understand a little bit more now. And that's just me wanting you to do what I think you're good at. But that doesn't mean shit at the end of the day. It's all about you and how you want to navigate your life. And I understand it completely. I just was like, fuck, she's so good at arguing. She's so good at, but you weren't good like in a, I'm going to defeat you way. You were good in a tactful sense. And that's hard to do, is be good at arguing in a tactful manner, or rather keep your composure, etc. So but I always saw that. And then obviously to boot, when you were training, you just unleashed a lot of willpower and discipline with your training. I mean, you would come to sessions early in the morning and I knew you didn't want to be there, not because you just said it, but your body language would speak it. And obviously a part of being a trainer is being able to read body language and read mannerisms, etc. before you even walk through the door. I'm reading that when you exit your car. Mm-hmm. And so when there are multiple mornings where I know you didn't want to go, but you still came, and you didn't just come and put in the work, you like put in the fucking work. So I admired you and respected you even more on that principle as well. We obviously departed, right? You had some things come up, or not, COVID came up really. Mm-hmm. And then you had to take a leave, or I took a leave. There was like 3-month break. I forgot really why we separated. It might've been both, but like you had some things going on mm-hmm. and COVID happened simultaneously. And then you're witnessing a conversation that really is for the first time taking place in like what? 3 years? Yeah. I don't know. 3 years. When you came to the studio, we didn't talk much, and it's a good thing because we wanted to save the shit for the mic.
Yeah,
that's the best thing is when we get organic convo that people are hearing in real time for the first time.
Yeah,
and I mean, we obviously said hi and shit. We were, but at the same time, there wasn't a lot of dispensary, in terms of the conversation. And that's a good thing because now we're going to let it all out and we're going to hear a lot about you. And obviously you can ask me whatever you want as well. I'm an open book. However,
saying that to a lawyer.
Whatever, let's do it. But
I'll do it in the most tactful way possible, yes. Just like you said.
But I shared a brief moment on my Instagram stories about who I had coming on. I didn't want them to know, so I didn't tag you in it. But I did mention that there is an amazing story to you. And that's really what this podcast is centered around, is people's stories, what they've been through, not necessarily where they are currently, because I don't really care as much about that. I care about what you've been through and what you've essentially circumvented out of. So where do you want to start?
Boy, there are so many places it could be. I'm like, well, how much time do you have? We could start back when I was in 7th grade. Just kidding. I don't know. I mean, so much of kind of what has happened over the last 8 years or so has a backstory as well as to how I got there and how I got involved in. So maybe, I don't know, like generally speaking, I'm not sure like the way you like to do it, but I could kind of share a little bit of how I ended up coming to you, which is actually potentially a very long story, so I don't want to monopolize too much time.
We have a lot of time. This is long form convo.
Okay.
So you start wherever you want.
Well, just to kind of give you, first I just want to say thank you for what you said. That means a lot to me. I've always respected you, and I definitely felt connected to you right when I met you. And funny enough, just because he mentioned he liked me, and it probably was because he wasn't trying to date me. I moved back to the area after a prolonged period of very challenging professional life and personal life. And after taking, I'm sure we'll get into it, but a really big leap and leaving a law firm that I was on partnership track, because it did not align with my values. And it made me feel like I was losing my soul 0.1, increments at a time, because I was at a billable hour law firm. And when I came here, I was really, really broken. And when I started to decide I wanted to get back into fitness, because sports athletics have been in my life since I was a kid, I literally, how I found you was on Yelp. I looked for a personal trainer. You had these great reviews. I looked at your Instagram and I was like, I could look at that every week. And so literally, I mean, I'm that whatever. I was just like, give it a shot. We'll see. I'll give this guy a call. I didn't look at anybody else. And it was so good for you for posting good pictures. It brings in some clientele, and then it evolves into a great friendship, which is lovely, but good for you on that. But I came in and I really, I didn't have a ton of expectations. I just wanted some accountability to get back into a regular fitness program. I was also going through like a massive overhaul of my diet. I was going into an autoimmune protocol diet because I have autoimmune disease, and just lots and lots of changes. And I came in and you didn't make me feel uncomfortable. You didn't make me feel nervous. I just could tell it was the right fit right from the start. And the reason I think that we parted ways was because I had started doing Muay Thai kickboxing for a while, and I had to start picking and choosing like where I was spending my money. And I knew that a lot of the things that we did at the time, I also belonged to a gym and a yoga studio, and I was teaching spin.
Right, yeah.
And so I had to kind of make some adjustments, and I'll tell you, but there was never anything I've missed more in all the things I've done in fitness than our sessions.
Oh.
And so, it's been an interesting journey with us. But to get to that point, where I was starting from scratch, essentially, there's a lot of backstory there. So what's the best way you want me to just...
However you want.
I just don't want to be one of those people who just goes on a like huge long diatribe and it's basically like a monologue,
I understand. Okay, so let's start from the loss of your husband.
Okay, that's a fair place to start. That's a big part of the story. So when I was, the quick summary is, when I was 15, when I was in high school, like most kids, I started experimenting with alcohol and drugs. And much like the way you described the way I approached training is the way I approach everything I do in my life. It's like I'm all in, and it's like this is what life is about. And I was a really insecure kid, even though I was extremely talented athletically. I had a lot of friends. But I always felt like something was really different about me, and I always felt uncomfortable. And so when I discovered alcohol and drugs, it was like the one time that I could take a deep breath, right? Where I was not thinking about what everybody was thinking of me. And I just kind of, do you have like a bleep? Is it okay if I curse?
Curse all you want.
You're Justin. Of course I can
Cuss all
curse.
you
What am I talking
yeah.
about? Like, it was the only time I didn't give a shit if anybody was, what anybody thought. And so it was kind of the only time like I said, I felt like I could take a deep breath. And that, like everything I do, got progressively more and more significant. I went to college, started drinking, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and just more and more and more. But I had come to college, and I had come to college on an athletic scholarship. I went to Cal Poly for swimming, and within a month, I decided. At the time, I thought that I made this decision on my own because I just didn't want to be tied down to the sport. I didn't realize it was kind of the first thing that alcohol took from me, because I no longer wanted to do the work. I wanted to party, and I couldn't do both to the caliber I wanted to do them at the same time. So I went into like years of progressively worsening alcoholism, which is funny because when I was a freshman in college, did you ever have like you're not a drinker, but did you ever like a pre-party pump up song? Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. So like my pump up song when I was a freshman in the dorms.
Let me guess.
Do it.
I don't know. It's Eminem. Is it Eminem?
No, but it should be.
Okay, because you were all about Eminem.
You know that
trained.
I can rap every single word. My maiden name is Tapper, and my nickname in high school might have been Rapatappa. Might have been. If you want to see it, it's on my Instagram. I have regrettably posted entire Eminem songs of me.
Yeah,
Eminem.
All of it. Eminem is the shit.
Yeah.
Eminem is the best freestyle lyricist I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Ever. Like he could just go in and swamp people.
Amazing. Like Rap God, best song.
Yeah.
Like, forever.
That's like a hidden. Okay, so that's like I would love if that were my hidden talent. Uh-huh. Like if God said, look, Justin, I grant you with one talent, it would be to be able to have the ability to freestyle and spit like that. Oof. And go in any crowd of people and just hammer.
Unbelievable.
And just, yes. Oh, I would love to decimate people like that.
The only... See, so, but I got it's not an unfortunate talent, just kind of a more less talent that I can memorize all of it. I can't actually come up with any of it on my own.
Yeah.
Unless it's in a context of actual writing. But yeah, it's my pre-party song was an Exhibit song, and it was the song Call It What You Want to Call It, I'm a Fucking Alcoholic. Now,
Okay.
I was 17 when that became my pre-party song. I mean, it was so ironic that I was later to really graduate to becoming an alcoholic. But because I really did. I just, from the time I started drinking, I wasn't interested in, you know, just having fun. It was always about changing the way I felt, because I hated how I felt, and I hated myself, and I had so many insecurities. And it was just, like I said, it was like this freedom from that. You know, it was like the one thing that would let it shut off. Like, because I have this chatter in my brain. My late husband used to talk about that, you know, it just goes all the time. It's just talking, telling me what a piece of shit I am, telling me that I'm not good enough. And it would just shut that off for a little while. And I just chased that feeling. And the reason I mention all that in the context of my husband, many years later, after I graduated from college, I lived abroad for a time. I had an Italian fiance for a time. That was interesting. You think relationships are hard in your first language? Like, try it when it's both your second, because he was half Mexican, half Italian. He spoke only Spanish and Italian when I met him. I didn't speak Spanish because, of course, I took 5 years of French, which was super useful. And so I learned Italian to be in this relationship. But I was still so insecure after graduating from school. I decided maybe if I get some more letters after my name, I'm going to feel better about myself. Maybe I'll feel like I'm smart. So I decided to, you know, take the LSAT, got into law school. And so I ended up, the first semester of law school, I just found myself butting heads with people more and more, having a harder time getting along with other people, and just feeling extremely insecure, because anybody who's been to a sort of competitive educational environment, it's very challenging. And I already had a lot of insecurities because I was undiagnosed ADHD until I was 19. And so when I was young, I just thought I was stupid. I didn't know that there was just a different neurodivergence in my brain, and that I'd learned differently. I just thought something was wrong with me. And so I go to law school, end up finding out that Italian stallion was quite a stallion when I was away. And he had a whole different life going on that I wasn't aware of. And so we broke up. I moved into a studio apartment. I got 2 cats because I couldn't get along with my roommate. Like, we had to break our lease in 3 months because I was just like, she's horrible. I didn't realize till later I had all these roommates that were horrible, but I was the one who was in all of those apartments. Yeah. I don't like sharing space very much, but so I ended up just kind of, what that relationship, that breakdown did was give me an excuse to drink how I wanted to, because I felt like a victim. And I was like, pour me another drink, you know? And so I would go hard at school. I would get there at 7 a.m. I thought, because I was such a good student. The truth was, my school was next to a dive bar, and if I didn't get there early enough, I would have to park past the dive bar and walk to campus. And I stopped being able to pass the bar, and I would go in and I'd have some drinks, and then I'd go to class. And I got called on in civil procedure class completely wasted. I had done the reading and had like no idea what was going on. And I ended up, I had a friend who confronted me and said, you know, I think you're brilliant, Lisa, and I think that you can do so much with your life, and I think you're going to ruin it by the way you're drinking. And I was so insulted, but I knew forever that I didn't drink like other people. And so I ended up working for this woman who, she seemed really cool. And because I have no sense of boundaries, I like tell her my story of my whole life in like 3 days or something. And I'm like, we should go out and get a drink. And she was like, I've been sober for 20 years. And I was like, and if you're listening, not watching, my eyes got real big because I was like, sorry, like, you don't look like you're old enough to be sober that long. And it turned out she had gotten sober when she was 21 years old. And, you know, there were so many things that had to align for that woman to end up coming into my life when she did. And I, you know, shared these problems that were going on in my life. And she's like, you know, you ever thought about you might have an issue with alcohol? And I was like, No, lying, completely lying. And at any rate, long story short, she ended up taking me with her to a recovery program that she was involved in. And I stopped drinking from the first time I went to one of those meetings. And I haven't drank since June 14th of 2008. So I just celebrated 14 years of sobriety. Awesome. And all of this is like, what does this have to do with your dead husband? Well, because years later, after moving several times and passing the bar and all that, I got involved in that same recovery group up in the Bay Area once I moved up there from San Diego after law school. And I met my husband in recovery. And we had a fast and furious connection. Just obsessed with each other from the very beginning. I now look back and I'm able, because it's been 7 years since he died. It was 7 years last month, July 11th. And I can look at the dynamics of the relationship and see that there was a lot of codependence. There was a lot of sort of unhealthy stuff going on there, as much as I treasure every bit of it and I wouldn't change it. But it was challenging as a relationship. As you know, he was a bit older than me. Do you remember how much older?
Not quite.
He was 23 years older than me. He looked really good for his age. I've just got to, put that out there. But I was late 20s. He was coming out of a long marriage. He had 2 older children. His daughter was only 8 years younger than me. And so I became, the scapegoat of the family of I was the reason his marriage failed. It was really messy. I was not liked by the family, to say the least. But we moved in together almost right away. He moved in while he was going to, quote unquote, find his own place, and never left. And we were together for a few years. We had a beautiful, one of those relationships that's the most passionate and loving and amazing when it's good. And when it's not good, it's really not good. We had these identical character defects. We were both jealous. We were both, just all that kind of stuff. But we loved each other. I knew he always used to say that God took him and took me and faced us towards each other and said, Lisa, Patrick, this is what you've been looking for. And we both felt that way. And in September, so now it's August now, right? August 10th or something, whatever date it is today. 8 years ago, we were on a vacation to Maui with his 2 children. And things were getting integrated with the family. Things were getting better. And would have never known anything was wrong. And then a month later in the middle of the night, the saying, your life can change overnight, really happened, because we had gone to a recovery meeting, our regular Monday night meeting, came home, and he had been real irritable. But he was going through a lot, and things happen, couples fight. But I heard him in the middle of the night talking in our living room. And I was going, it's 2 a.m. And I go out to the living room, and he's sitting straight up on the floor, and he's looking around, not particularly at anything, but he's speaking really loud, but it's all gibberish coming out of his mouth. They're not words that can make any sense at all. And I'm looking at him, and I'm trying to catch his attention. I'm going, Patrick. And he's just looking at me, but it's he's looking through me, and he's not there. And so I thought he was having a stroke. Called 911. He had 2 grand mal seizures on the way to the hospital. They put him in a medically induced coma for 72 hours. And the initial imaging of his brain, they saw something, but because he had some hemorrhaging, they couldn't clearly see in the MRI what it was. And this tumor board of an unnamed facility, which wasn't my favorite medical facility for that to happen at, they all voted and decided it was this, it wasn't a tumor. It was something that was a congenital defect. He'd have to have surgery, but he'd be fine. they ended up discharging him from the hospital, and within a few weeks, within 2 days from coming home from the hospital, he had another seizure, went back in, and we found out that he had a brain tumor. And a few weeks after that, he had started the standard of care treatment, which was a craniotomy, so brain surgery, and the pathology showed it was glioblastoma, which is grade 4 brain cancer, worst kind you can get. And there's more to that story, obviously, but it went into, I was working full time as an attorney. He needed 24/7 care from the very beginning. And I thought, he had spent his life helping people, and our recovery program in particular, and giving back to people. And I thought, no question, my role in this situation is to show him every day how loved he is and to be his advocate. And thank God I had the legal training I did. And if nothing ever comes from, this whole mountains of debt, from student loan debt and all that stuff, to have the skills I had to get him the care he needed, which is a whole other topic for another day about access to good medical care. But that was enough, because I was able to be with him every day. And he spent 5 months as an inpatient in the hospital on and off, because he kept having seizures they couldn't control. And then about 8 months into his treatment, he wasn't responding to things. He was getting worse. They didn't know why. I had him at one of the best, at the time it was the #1 neurology and neurosurgery center in the country. And I remember the day when they came in and they just said, "Lisa, we don't know why he's getting worse." And when I realized these are the best people in the country and they don't know what's wrong, and I knew he was going to die. And he shortly after he made the courageous decision to stop regular treatment and went into hospice. And we got married a week later. He had asked me to marry him a few months before in the hospital. And it was beautiful. We got married at our apartment complex, and my friends and family rallied to put this thing together, and it was perfect. And he had a good day that day, because I think this will come up later, but a lot of what happened during his illness was he had a lot of bad days where he was not himself. But he had a good day, and 48 days later, on July 11th of 2015, I held him as he died. And there are a lot of people who express experiences of witnessing someone die, say it's magical. They see the other side. They're at peace. That was not the case for him. It was very traumatic for me. But I was there, and that's something that I'll be proud of every day for the rest of my life. I could have never done more than what I did for him during that time. But obviously it was just completely devastating. At that point, I was 7 years sober, and he died. He had 26 years of sobriety.
So what was the most traumatic thing about that, apart from obviously losing somebody that you love so dearly?
Throughout the experience, the tricky part, I've been an advocate with the brain tumor community. It took about a year after he died before I ever wanted to even hear the words brain tumor again. But I've been a really involved advocate with some different organizations since then. The tricky part is that every brain tumor affects people differently, right? So glioblastoma, the median survival rate is, I believe it's 15 months. And the survival rate past 5 years is less than 5%, or it might be 5% now, and that's gone up. And so not everybody depending on what part of your brain is affected by the tumor, everybody has a different experience. And unfortunately, Patrick's tumor, the best way to describe it is it presented in a way that was almost like he had cancer of the body, but he also had Alzheimer's and dementia at times. Fortunately, he always came back from it, and I could see, just like that first day where he wasn't looking at me, it was like he was a different person. I could see the switch in his eyes when he would go away and I was talking to the tumor and I was not talking to him. And in the beginning especially, I didn't know what was happening. It was terrifying. He was very strong. And he was very violent and extremely verbally abusive as well. And like, this is a man who I had never heard him use the words that he would at times only use for days at a time, because he would have psychosis after his seizures. And sometimes it would last a few hours and sometimes it would last 2 weeks. And during that time, I mean, we called him like a frequent code gray in the hospital, which code gray in the hospital, if they call it, means get security in here, because he's ripping out his IVs. He doesn't know what's happening, but what he knows is he's looking at me. I'm not stopping it. And he's thinking that I'm in this conspiracy against him. He becomes paranoid, and physically violent. And when he was in the hospital, I had people to help. But I refused to put him in a home, or somewhere that was not his home. I wanted to care for him at home. And as a result, those things continued to happen, but it was just me. And so I was afraid of him being removed from the home if I told the truth about what was happening. And so I just didn't tell people. And so I was kind of experiencing all this abuse, and I didn't talk about it. Also, because he was an extremely private person, I didn't want to do anything that would malign his reputation. He couldn't speak for himself. And anybody who knew him knew that this was his tumor. This was not him. But I just didn't want anybody to know what was happening, and I wanted to protect his privacy. And so I just took all kinds of abuse for a long time. And so living with that, living in a heightened state of fight or flight for the entire 10 months, because there was always a crisis. My nervous system just became extremely dysregulated. And my whole body just completely like shut down after he died. But so much of the trauma was just because sometimes he was my Patrick, the loving guy. And I'd love it because I'd see it, he'd come back, and then sometimes he wasn't. And it was a really sad thing to see. I saw it happen one time where I came home. One friend could stay with him when he was alone that could handle him and his moods. And I came home and he's looking at me with that look, and I know he's about to accuse me of something, right? Because it was like any nurse who entered the room, I was sleeping with them. Like everything. It was just terrible. And, he's screaming at me, calling me a terrible name while the friend is there. And I'm like, you can go. And my friend is horrified, but I'm like, it's okay. You can go. And usually he'd go to sleep and then wake up and not remember. But this time he didn't go to sleep. I'm sitting on the couch crying, and he just looks over at me and he goes, "Baby, what's wrong?" And I was like, "Do you not know what just happened?" And he didn't. And he made me tell him. And when I told him what he said, he just put his head in his hands and he started rocking back and forth, just saying, "How can this happen? How can this happen?" He had no memory of it. And that was the blessing, I think, for him, is that he didn't remember. But I did. So that was a lot to internalize.
Man.
Yeah, I don't think you've ever heard like the true extent of all of it either.
No, I haven't. Mm-mm.
I haven't honestly talked about it until very recently, like, because it took me a lot of years of continuing to worry about his reputation. And what if his family hears what I'm saying? I've learned I don't care. At this point, I just have to be true to what the truth was. And I know that he would respect whatever I needed to do to heal.
Right, and it wasn't even anything he could control anyway.
No.
So it's not like it's a bad thing.
No.
You can't control it,
Yeah, but I didn't at the time. I just wanted everyone. He had such a amazing reputation in our community, and I didn't want that to change.
Man.
Yeah. Sorry to dump that on you, but
2015. So after 2015,
yeah,
you then tell us the journey after his departure. Unfortunately,
so after he died, a couple months later, I went back to work at the same firm I had been with, and they were supportive throughout this process and let me take off time. When we weren't initially married at first, and so it was very complicated trying to get time off and all that stuff. But they stuck with me, so I stuck with them. And I just couldn't get back to where I had been in terms of the pace of the work that was required, the volume of work. It was just always too much. I was always afraid that I was going to start crying in court, or, in a deposition. Fortunately, that never happened, but I didn't know until about 6 months after he died, when I was having nightmares and flashbacks of, like, not just the night he died, but all the things I've sort of alluded to, that I was in therapy, and I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, which, PTSD is the DSM accepted diagnosis. Complex PTSD isn't officially recognized, although most practitioners recognize it. But I started I was, the first year after he died, I felt like everybody kind of where I was working had patience for me, and understood that things were taking me longer and that it was hard, and I was having a hard time. But unfortunately, we live in such a death-phobic society, and we are so misinformed about death and grief and what it really is, that we have this artificial timeline that you're supposed to follow. And so in my mind, I'm going, okay, just get through the first year. The first year is going to be the hardest. I'm going to graduate from Grief University after a year, and then it's going to be fine. And the truth of that was, well, first of all, that's total bullshit. Like, everybody's experience is completely different, and my experience is grief just becomes a part of you. It doesn't go away. But the firm also had that same sort of expectation of that timeline. And when I still couldn't keep up with the level that they needed me to or wanted me to, I started getting a lot of sort of like passive aggressive, like, I always joke that there's like a sad faced emoji on my my monthly billing report. Instead of my boss coming and talking to me and saying like, what's going on and how can we help, it was just like, sad face, like, you should be billing more than this. And the more I went on, at the time I was working as a defense attorney in civil litigation, and a lot of my clients were insurance companies, and I was doing workers' comp, and I started feeling, I'd always not liked working for insurance companies for a variety of reasons. I'm like, oh gosh, I'm pigeonholing myself if anybody ever hears this. But this is good because I'll put this out there into the ether. I don't want to ever go back to a job like this. But I no longer felt like working for insurance companies where my role, while I was a check on the system to make sure that people, there's a lot of fraud in workers' comp, you're making sure that the right claims are getting the right benefits. I could no longer in good conscience be a part of a system that was denying people care after what I had experienced getting my husband care, and the red tape and the constant battling, and how much of my time that should have been spent at my husband's bedside was on the phone with insurance companies, hospitals, administrators who were not doctors and who had no idea like what he actually needed. And I just couldn't be a part of that system anymore. And so I did it for a few years, and I kept trying to live in the Bay Area and maintain this life. And I was grieving, and it was ugly. I went through, you remember me talking about my sheet cake phase? You remember that?
Yes, of course. Sheet cake.
I was literally eating sheet cake for multiple meals a day, which is one of the many reasons I ended up at Justin's front door. But
it was vanilla sheet cake, right?
Oh, it didn't really matter. It was whatever had the most frosting. And it wasn't even like good sheet cake. We're talking like
Vaughn's, yeah.
Sheet cake with a lot of those flowers on top. And I started doing it like totally alcoholically, where I would like go to different bakeries because I was afraid the people would notice how often I was there.
Oh shit.
There was like a guy who one time he asked me, do you want anything written on the cake? And I just looked at him with like daggers, and I so badly wanted to say, my fucking cake. Like, that's what it's gotta say, okay? I was just like, no, it's fine. But I just kind of went into this spiral trying to fill this hole inside of me with food, with stuff. I bought a BMW, which is just all kinds of stuff that I thought was going to make me better. I got filler in my lips, and I got hair extensions, and I just, all this stuff trying to feel better, and none of it worked. And I thought it was the job. I knew what happened. I started getting really sick about a year after he died, a little over a year. I had a back surgery, and then they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I started realizing this is soul sickness. Like, I am doing something that is completely unaligned with my purpose, and I can't do it anymore. And it was the first time. I am a type A, overachieving, plan every second of every day type of person, which is why I mentioned before we started, it was Justin just asked me last night if I wanted to do this today. And I answered him at 3:50 in the morning when I was up to do a 4:30 a.m. ride on my Peloton, because that's who I still am. But it didn't give me enough time to ask questions of like, what are you going to ask me? What are we going to talk about? And that's the kind of person I'm used to being.
Okay, so let me be fully transparent right now. I remember that about you, and I remember how much of a planner you are. And I've had this slot open for you since you had last reached out to me about, jokingly doing a podcast. But in my mind, I wasn't joking. And I'm like, okay, I know I have this spot. Normally, I don't typically do Wednesdays as a guest with a guest. I typically do an ISO session or just a solo session, right? But I know that that's the way your mind works, and I'm not going to get the best out of you if I do that, if I tell you in advance, like a few days. And so even though it wasn't a long period of time in between when we had jokingly talked about doing a podcast together and the actual, event, I know that that's the way your mind's going to work and operate. And I know I'm not going to get the best out, because the only thing I give a shit about is raw transparency.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just me, but it's for people that are listening.
Yeah.
People don't really care about a script.
Right.
And the fact is, I didn't want you to stress over this or get anxiety over it. And so I knew I had the slot, and I was kind of preparing my mind. Like, I know I want you to do it. I know this is the day I want you to do it, but I wanted to tell you last minute. I knew that there was a possibility that you're going to decline because, people have schedules and shit. And so, but I just took the shot in the dark, provided this was the best way to get to you and not have your mind go 1,000 miles an hour about what we're going to, talk about, et cetera, et cetera. And you did ask that, obviously, but, full disclosure to the viewers, you did ask what we're going to talk about, or what we want to talk about, or something of that nature.
Yeah, tell me where, when, and what you want to talk about, right. Or are you going to surprise me? And you said anything and everything, and I asked no further questions.
Yes. and that's all. And that's really the thesis behind the podcast, is really just that, just being raw, transparent. Whatever comes up is whatever comes up. It's conversation, But I also wanted you to come on because once you were joking about it, it really did spark the thought more provocatively, because I know you have a backstory. I know you have this fucking crazy story, and I only know segments of it. And I know there's a lot of filler between those segments. And I know that that's going to be very penetrable to people as well, because they'll be able to relate to you. Likely. I mean, this podcast goes out to everybody, anywhere. Anybody can get a hold of this. So that's another reason why I wanted you on. And so again, knowing that was going to be probably the case, or you would rack your brain in whoa, what the fuck are we going to talk about? What do I say? How do I have to kind of be spontaneous with you.
You were smart in doing that, and
I'm not that smart.
Well, you were at least intuitive enough to know, me well enough to understand that. That's absolutely accurate. That's, I'm a preparer. It's what I was trained as a lawyer to be, right? You want to know your argument, you want to know every possible outcome for everything. What are your, ins, out, and the other, everything that you could possibly think about. And the good thing is, over the last year, I've had so many things where, like, if I've learned anything, is that I don't know shit about what's going to happen. I mean, I can have ideas and goals and plans or ideas that I want to work towards, but I am not in control of anything. And so recently I've kind of had this more of this mindset of just like, just say yes to things and stop asking questions, you know? And just a few weeks ago, it was like the first time my friend asked me to come to her birthday party. I've been really, really quarantined during all of this COVID stuff. And I just said yes. It was the next day. You know, I got to see her, then got to see some other people. And I've started to feel like the energy and the universe sort of shifting for me to say yes to things, start getting out there. And yeah, spontaneous conversation. And one of the good things is I've told my story both as an advocate for the brain tumor community and in recovery many, many times. So it's like it always comes out better if you're not, you know, scripted and rehearsed, because it's not, if I value anything like you, like authenticity is what matters to me. Honesty, authenticity, like the rest of it's just bullshit, you know?
Yeah, and even though it might be true bullshit, it's still you can't, I guess I'll say this, you can't prepare for anything.
No.
You really just can't. You can try to prepare for things that are, you know, dates or events that are coming up or what have you, but really you can't prepare for what life throws at you. And you're an awesome, well, I don't mean this this is going to sound bad but good, but you're an awesome illustration or example for that, because you haven't been able to prepare for shit, and there's been a lot of bullets coming your way.
Yeah.
And I mean, unfortunately, I'm hearing it through Instagram. But at the same time, I'd rather hear about that shit personally, but that's not the case with us right now. So I hear about it through Instagram, and I've reached out to you several times in your stories, but it doesn't know justice in terms of in juxtaposition to if I were with you in person and, you know, having real time convo. But you had a lot of bullets come your way and you can't prepare for any of that shit. So how do you rectify the situations? How do you find solutions to what you're going through? Like, give one example of what you've been through that you couldn't prepare for, that you've made it out of.
I was like, some of the things are still ongoing, but made it out of. I mean, I think even just leaving that job without a backup plan and saying, I'm going to move home. I had to move home with my parents several years ago when I moved down to the Central Coast, without a job. You know, I remember my dad said to me, you can't not have a plan, and you have a good job and they pay you well. And I've had a lot of, aside from the PTSD, a lot of challenges with anxiety, depression, you know, over the years. And the only way I could get my dad to understand the severity of it was to say, well, yeah, a good job is nice. A good paycheck is nice. None of it matters if I'm fucking dead, you know, because it was that point that I was very suicidal. And, you know, it finally made him understand, like, this is not a joke. Like, my mental health is really at risk here. And so just deciding to do anything without a plan was like unheard of in my life. But I did that. And I thought I was going to be off work for like, I don't know, like a month or two. And I ended up being off of work for almost a year before I got a job down here and went back to work full time, which I did again. And I made some changes in that job. It was like, oh, it's not billable hours. It'll be different, right? But at the end of the day, the underlying tone of what I was doing was still very much the same. And I had to go through again getting very sick and continue to get sicker in order to see, like, the people who are able to stay in bad situations and just sort of like muscle through it and just accept this is what life is. You know, nobody likes their job. Like, just be responsible, be a good capitalist, you know, like participate in the ultimate design of checking the boxes. Like, I was unable to physically do that anymore after the pandemic. I worked from home for a year and then I just got sicker and sicker. And, you know, again, had to make the decision to go back off of work. And and I guess I shouldn't say that. I didn't have to, but it didn't feel like much of a choice because I've gotten to a point where I'm so aligned with who I am and what my values are that it doesn't feel like a choice to stay in something that isn't compatible with that, And so I think a lot of times, like, what did I do to get through things? I literally put one foot in front of the other. I learned to live a day at a time a long time ago. And for many years, I knew that in theory, but didn't really understand what it meant to actually have to live day to day. But that's the situation I've sort of been forced into. I can't make plans right now because things with my health are really up in the air. I can't, my current circumstances are such that I can't, I don't know when the circumstances are going to change. There's no like light at the end of the tunnel for this current health situation. But I can also see that because of that, I could be depressed every day. I could stay in the dark, and which is totally justifiable because I have a couple of weird headache conditions that make me really light sensitive. So being in the dark literally is like something I do. But what I've learned to do is practice not just self-care, because that's important, but actually having self-compassion and understanding, you know what? Some days I'm going to wake up, I'm going to be in pain, I'm going to be sick, I'm going to be depressed, whatever it is. And today, that's what today is, right? Okay, that's going to be that. And tomorrow I'll try again, and tomorrow I try again, and sometimes it lasts longer than I'd like it to. But I'm okay with giving myself grace and saying every day you can't be a fucking rock star, like you just can't.
Some people adopt that same type of mindset, but they're not good discerners of what day it actually is. So for example, I've had clients come in numerous times and they say, it's just one of those days. There's one in particular, I will not mention names. The one in particular that she would come in and she's just one of those days. And in my head, I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? What is just one of those days? But look, I am of different hardwire. Yeah. So I cannot expect, much less a female, to operate the same way on the same frequency as a male does with regards to work, doing shit. It's like males are taught most of their lives, don't be in your feelings. They're just taught that. They're taught that by their fathers. And even if they're not taught that, they see it. They see it visually unfold in their dads or in their grandparents. Exactly. It's the culture. So we're just kind of indoctrinated to think, fuck how I feel. I have to do this shit, right? So men kind of have a leg up in most men have a leg up in that regard, and they'll just do shit they have to do even if they don't like the way they like what they're doing, like, for example, like their jobs. You think most men dream about working for the government or the city? Well, I'm going to go get a city job because that's my dream. I want to work for the city. Now, city is great because there's a bunch of fucking benefits. You got job security, etc. You do different jobs all the time, whatever, right? I got a lot of friends that are, not a lot, I got like 2 friends that are in city work right now. And they don't love it, but they like it, and they like for what it provides. Right. And as a man, that's what you give a shit about. Being able to be a provider. Like, that's already kind of predisposed in your DNA, is to want to be a provider, provide for a woman, if you have a family, etc. That gives you a sense of contribution, confidence, competency, etc. So we want to do that, but we don't necessarily like doing it, perhaps. Okay. But with this particular woman, she would come in a lot and say that a lot. And it's like, but okay, do you really feel that way? Or is it just one thing went wrong in the morning, and then you decided to let it muck up your entire rest of the morning? And this is likely going to be the theme for the rest of the day. Is that what's happening? But I guess I mind my P's and Q's when it comes to certain folks. There's folks again. certain people, but I don't want to, even though I'm what seemingly is a combative person or a confrontational person, at least what I dispense with on this podcast, I don't really like to be that in real conversation, in real time, in real energy exchanges with people, because that doesn't make the situation better. Likely, if I contend with it, it's not going to likely make her situation better. It's not going to, circumvent it to be something more positive. Now, the best I have, or rather the best thing I could hope for, is give her a good workout and help her to feel better on her own when she leaves, because of whatever she went through and whatever endorphins it did end up secreting, etc., that made her have a better sense of well-being, and she can leave on her own accord feeling better because of what she put forth into the workout. So I have to be now the navigator in what exercises I think she's going to benefit from based on her productivity level currently, mood currently, etc. So anyways, that whole plays a hand in being a personal trainer. But at the same time, in my mammal brain or my reptilian brain, I'm thinking, just suck it up. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You live in California, you drive a car. By most countries' standards, you're fucking rich. And you're complaining about this. You're complaining about because your coffee wasn't creamered enough in the morning, or you didn't have a Splenda to go with your fucking coffee. I don't know. I'm just saying, This is not real life example. I'm just saying, like, it could have been as minuscule as that. Mm-hmm. So where do you discern? You have to be, what I'm saying is, a long-winded way of saying, you have to be a good discerner of what allowance you give the day, if it's that bad of a day or not. And that's also a long-winded way of getting at the fact that you do have that discerning quality to you. You're not just going to pussy out for the day because something as minuscule as the coffee creamer not being there is going to ruin your day. You're going to supersede above that. It's got to be something drastic for it to ruin the day for Lisa.
Most of the time. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit with some of that. Just in that, I think, yes, for sure, men and women and, non-binary folks, people are wired differently, right? But I do think that there are certain things that are, in my opinion, much more about environment, right? And what we're taught in our society as to what our roles are. And men are taught, keep your feelings in, and women are allowed to have more emotion. Although, the way that it manifests is judged differently, right? Like, so a woman who is assertive is seen as a bitch in the corporate setting. A man who is assertive is seen as a go-getter. Those are different standards, unfortunately, that exist. But I do think that, like, first, I'd like to think most people, if the creamer in the coffee isn't there, to use your example, it's not about the creamer in the coffee, right? It's like the one more thing that it's just like, can everything not be fucked up? And so it sounds like it's about the coffee creamer, but it's not. Like, generally speaking, in my experience, when it's like, for me, because it might sometimes seem like this really isn't that serious, Lisa. Like, why am I getting so worked up about it? It's rarely about the inciting event, right? It's much more about, what is this triggering within me? This is triggering, I'm feeling out of control. I'm feeling shame, about my current situation. I'm feeling like worthless, whatever it is. And most of it comes from childhood stuff, right? That up until about 8 months ago, shockingly, when I had to move back with my family again, that I didn't even realize were in existence. But my whole thing with the idea of, first, to answer the question about discernment, right now, I haven't been able to work because of my health for quite some time, which, as a person who has, I didn't graduate second in my class from law school because my life goal was to move home with my parents, right? Like, this is not the plan that I had for my life. And this is not where I thought I'd be at this point in my life. But circumstances have been such that, you know, I also didn't plan for my husband to die. I didn't plan to have such severe PTSD and trauma that my whole body freaked out and I ended up in this autoimmune whirl and all this stuff. But the discernment for me comes when, like, I'm able to now, after like years of therapy, to actually feel when my body is dysregulated, when my stuff starts going funky and wonky. And sometimes, even though I see it and I know what's happening, I can't stop it from happening. I'm just aware of it. And the fortunate part is I know it's going to pass. But when I feel that dysregulated, and it's not just something like, you know, a little thing, the coffee, whatever, then I can say, okay, like, this is happening as a result of, you know, continued trauma in my body. There's a really great book called The Body Keeps the Score, if you've ever heard of it. It's about PTSD and how trauma lives in your body and like what it actually does, the physiology behind it, which I've learned so much about and I feel so much better about, because I'm like, I'm not just crazy. Like, it's literally trauma working itself out in the body. When those things kind of happen, I will allow myself to let the feelings go through me, because my experience is that when I push things away and I just muscle through it, which is what I did for most of my life, it's still there, right? It lives somewhere in my body and it will come up eventually, whether it's, you know, the next day somebody cuts me off in traffic and I go completely ballistic, which is something I'm still working on. I'm not the most spiritual in my car, which we know because I had a car accident leaving training with you that one time. That's because I was taking an Instagram video while I was driving, which was not endorsed by Justin, by the way. Anyway, that got rid of that BMW real quick. But the idea that, like, so if it comes up the next day, or in the interaction that you have with your family or a friend, and you're sharp on something, and it's like, this is why I say so many things are not the thing, the inciting event, it's something else. Like, or if it's 10 years down the road and you've been stuffing this emotional trauma, not processing it, and all of a sudden you end up with cancer. And I'm not saying that cancer is caused exclusively by those things, but do they help? No. Chronic stress on the body, we know, like, it just tears you down, right, over time. And so I'm kind of the type of person that I aim to stay away from, if you're familiar with the sort of the concept of toxic positivity, where it's like, you know, the idea of like, well, people have it better, you know, worse other places. Like, and that's always true. People are always there's always going to be somebody who has it worse off than you, right? But what's been important for me is to acknowledge that even if people have things worse than I do, what's happening right now and my feelings about it are valid, right? And so even if I could say, well, it's going to get better, because I'm just the type of person, what I've learned throughout this whole grief process and all the things I've been through in my life is that tying something up, what we want as a society, we are uncomfortable not just with death and dying and grief and any complex emotional, you know, situation. We are not comfortable as humans, particularly in our culture, with uncertainty, right? We want to be able to tie it in a bow and say, oh, but this great thing came out of trauma, right? Or this wonderful thing happened as a result. And that might be true, but it doesn't help in my experience to minimize what that traumatic experience is like for the person experiencing it, you know? And so I just bring it up because a lot of times, you know, people, all the grief platitudes people would say to me, well, he's in a better place now. I'm like, really? He's not with his best friend anymore? Like, what's better than that? You know, like at the time, I understand there are lots of theories about what's better than that, but like, all those things might be true, but what it feels like to the person who's going through those experiences is invalidating. It feels like I'm not being heard. It feels like my emotions, my feelings are being dismissed as not important. So I shut down. I stop talking about it. I start internalizing it. that keeps dysregulating my nervous system, and I can't get better, because I'm not being honest. And so when you mentioned, what you've seen about what's been going on with me has been through my Instagram stories. I'm very open in my stories, and I have a blog as well. I don't write in it that often anymore, because although now after listening to one of your podcasts on the way here about archiving, and that like you can't just have one thing you write every 2 months or whatever, like you need to have consistent stuff so that you have something to go back to. I started sharing really openly about these challenges that I've had, in hopes that somebody who's going through it and who is not talking about it can say, I feel a little bit less alone. Somebody else is experiencing this. And so there are a lot of people who might see my experience and what I'm talking about as being quote unquote negative, right? Like, oh, it's always talking about these problems. But you know what? Those problems are my life right now. Like I can't control like the stuff that's going on with my health. I can't control, but what I can control is how I respond to it. And what I've noticed for me and what has given me that peace I was talking about at the beginning is just being honest about where I'm at. And it's not always pretty, and we don't all have the luxury of just shutting down for a day. The reason I can do that right now is because I'm not working, right? So like if I had a full-time job that I had to just get up and go to, which I did for a lot of years, it's a really, I feel like the way that our system is set up, it discourages people from really digging deep, right? Because there isn't time. We think there isn't time. But you know what? To me, if I can make time to work out for whatever, it could be even 20 minutes, but I rarely work out less than 90 minutes or whatever I do. Like, if I can make time for that, but I think I don't have time to really get in touch with what's going on with me, I don't have that discernment about what's going on unless I can really know what's happening in my body, in my soul, in my mind. And like that has taken years of work and accepting that, like, man, I don't like the way things are right now, and that's okay. Like I don't have to like everything, and it doesn't mean I'm not grateful for things, because I believe that gratitude and unhappiness about your circumstances can coexist, because they do in me all the time. Like I'm angry about what's happening, but I'm also grateful that I do live in a country where, in California, even though my circumstances aren't great, I do have a family that I can live with right now, like while I'm going through all this stuff. So I just think it's important to also acknowledge that men in particular are not, in my experience, encouraged to explore those things as much as women are. But I do think that if we were really all on an equal playing field and we didn't have all these things like programmed into us from the time we were little about how we should be, there might be a little more, I think we'd be surprised there'd be a little bit more evenness in terms of how we respond to the world as, men, women, or, however we identify, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Challenge me back, please.
No. So the thing is that you're correct in everything you're saying. The only problem is that you're speaking as a woman. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a large disconnect in regards to when you speak that way to a man, because men don't have that privilege. So the privilege, I know you want that to exist, and you want the advent of men to be more laced in their feelings, etc., or be able to identify their feelings and then be able to dispense with them. That doesn't work out in real life with other men, mixed with other men. Mm-hmm. So men will call other men absurd names because of that. And this life is all about civilization and acceptance. Mm-hmm. So by that token, that man won't be accepted by his other men. Mm-hmm. And then he's going to likely feel disconnected from his own tribe. Right. And that can only, go down the rabbit hole from there. We can only go down the rabbit hole from there and presuppose what would happen after that. But the reason, I don't not agree with what you're saying, But in actual reality, the way it plays out, that looks great on paper. The way it plays out in real civilization is an L for most men to operate on that platform. And is that discouraging? Yes. But is that also encouraging to males? Yes. Because males operate on a different playing field than women operate. And that actually, shaming a man, now we'll go to an extent to that we haven't talked about yet, but shaming a man can actually be encouraging to that man based on how he shamed and who he shamed from, or rather by. So let me give you an example. If I have a friend and he's fallen off the wagon with his diet and his training, I can tell him, bro, you're getting fat. What the fuck is happening? And he will be like, he might contend with me a little bit, but he's gonna sort of revel in that thought that I just told him and be like, you know what? He's not gonna say it to me. He's not gonna concede to it, but he's gonna know that I'm right. Because he's been telling himself the same shit,
right.
Just had a lack of discipline to make anything happen.
Right.
So, but a woman cannot tell another woman that.
Nope.
There'll be a fight, I'm sure, right?
Or at least not maybe to each other's faces, but there will be a lot of feelings of resentment.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you just said it right there, feelings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the man, even though he may feel a certain way, he's not going to tell that man, hey, listen, man, that makes me feel like shit. Like, you telling me that? That doesn't make me feel good. He's just going to suppress it, and he's going to do away with it, or rather, contend with it later on his own. But likely, it's going to encourage him to be different in that regard, or do better in that regard. And I'll give you an example. This happened in my life. When I was young, I got made fun of for a multitude of things. But we're talking about like young, like 10, 11, when I was playing like baseball and shit in minor
Formative
leagues.
years, yeah.
Yes. And I remember in particular one guy making fun of me something or other, and making fun of, and almost like, and also he was combative towards me in a physical manner. And I remember thinking that was threatening. Like, I was fearful in that time. And I remember the first thing I did when I got home, I went in the garage and I started fucking curling weights, and never lifted a weight in my life. But I know in terms of the DNA aspect of things, I knew the only way for me to combat this other man and compete with him is for me to get stronger. I don't know how to get stronger, so I do the only thing that I know how. I lift weights. I lift this fucking barbell up, and I start curling shit. Even though, to me, that's not... It's the only thing that I'm doing is trying to make myself more physically capable, because I don't know if that threat is going to impose on me again, and I want to make sure I'm fucking prepared. So that's what I did. I didn't start to box, although that would be another issue, not issue. That would be another activity I could partake in to better equip me for the threat that might come. But this man challenged me, and I was 11. And that's the first challenge I've ever had I still remember this guy's name, obviously. But he challenged me, and it put me in my seat to the point where I now have to do something to circumvent that feeling, to be not that feeling anymore, because that was shit. And I don't want to feel that way anymore. I don't want to feel that way again. So you know that feeling you get hot and you feel like you're bubbling all over, but it's not with
Scorpio. Of course I know.
Of course,
that feeling.
but it's not with rage. It's
Right.
like with fear.
Yes.
Like you're fear stricken, and so that's how I combated it. I went home that night, and it was after a baseball game, and I started doing shit to make me more prepared.
Right.
Even though I didn't know what I was doing. But that's the thing. It's like, I'm not going to go in my room and go in the corner and cry. Even though that's valid for some people to partake in. Not this man. And not most masculine men. It's not about being alpha. It's not about being beta. It's about you adopting traits that are otherwise predisposed to you for a millennia. It's not like we can change this in the last 100 years. This is
survival. Yeah.
Yes, survival. You're right. So as much as I want to agree that would look actually great on paper, and it does,
it doesn't play out the way that we'd like in real life.
Well, and I'd agree with you on that. I want to clarify too, because I think that I probably wasn't super clear. One of the things I want to say too is that I have absolutely used those situations that I might have felt shame, couldn't identify as shame at the time. It might have been fear, whatever it came up as. I still use physical exercise. I still use those things to sort out whatever's coming up for me, right? Like, and it doesn't always work, but I know, like, even for a little while, if I go do my workout, I'm focused on my workout. I'm not thinking about all that other shit. But for me, like, what's important is that in addition to doing that, I also need to be able to maybe look, and maybe sometimes that's just enough, right? Like, and I can just work out that frustration. I mean, I'm a hothead, okay? Like, I'm 14 years sober. We're meeting a very different Lisa O'Leary than we would have met like many years ago, where I was called a rageaholic by the first mentor I had in my recovery program, and she wasn't wrong. I'm only now kind of learning where all that anger came from. So I don't want to discount the importance of that too, and taking something that is hurtful, frustrating, enraging, fear-inducing, and doing something with it, right? It's, for me, it's just, I did all of that for as long as I could, until for me, whatever I was internalizing, it wasn't all getting out, right? When I would do those physical activities or whatever it was. And so for me, like, you know, when you're in a heightened state of fight or flight for a long period of time, that's where complex PTSD comes from. It's, instead of like an isolated incident, it's like prolonged trauma over a period of time. It's one of those things where, like, as those things build up, like, I can only put it down so much until my body has started to like internalize it. And I 100%, not 100%, maybe a large percentage of, I believe, why I ended up with an autoimmune disease is because I was so dysregulated for so long and my body went haywire. There are plenty of people, and I totally agree with you, that our society says men do not delve into all this other stuff, right? Like, and some people can get through life like that, you know, like, and don't need to go into that deeper place. Where does it come from? How to identify what's coming up when it's coming up? Because for me, getting to the place where I'm really in touch with like who I am, what my triggers are, it doesn't exempt me from the triggers, right? Like, they still happen. I shouldn't use this saying, but I'm gonna, like, I used to joke that I had automobile induced Tourette syndrome because I'm just such a foul mouth when I drive. I'm like, it's like the least spiritual place I can be. But like, those things still happen regardless of the fact that I know where it's coming from. But for me, it's important that I do know, I can identify where it's coming from, and I go, okay, I can see this is coming from a place of anger or rage, or, you know, whatever it's coming from. What is that underlying? It's usually fear of, what is, for me, I don't know if you agree with this, but like, what things come down to when I'm angry, upset, frightened, is the fear of not getting what I want or losing what I want to keep, right? Sure. And so I'm not saying, like, believe me, I don't think that I am going to be, well, I'm not going to say that because I don't know what comes in the future from all of this experience. I'll tell you, it is not ending up on my parents' couch sick all the time. That is not where I'm destined to end up. So this is just a long period of pain to go to the next phase, like you've talked about. Just keep living it and keep going through it. But I think it's just really important to be able to see, like, okay, I see where things are coming from. I'm not necessarily going to make this huge paradigm shift in how society and men in particular view things. Or, you know, just use, I think it's very useful to use anger, fear, motivation as motivation to become better, right? I recently had a situation. I'm very involved. Believe me, I'm not sponsored by Peloton, but I should be, because I like wear Peloton gear every day. I am on there every day. I post about it like every day, like the most obnoxious person ever. But if you want to know about somebody who has a Peloton, most people are like this. I'm a complete convert, which, by the way, is another story for another day, that I hated Peloton before I knew it, but that's what they call contempt prior to investigation. So, but I had a situation recently. I do this particular kind of training. I was involved with this group, and these women came for me, like unprovoked. Like, I thought these people were my friends. It was literally like I was living through Mean Girls in high school. Like, that all of a sudden, like, these people I thought were my friends, like, cast me out of the group that we were in. I tried to talk to them and say what's going on, got like no answers, all kinds of crazy accusations. And it was really painful for me as a human, because even though I knew it wasn't about me, because I reviewed my behavior and realized I hadn't done anything wrong, so there was nothing for me to be apologetic about. And I knew, so it was their shit. Like, I used that experience. I can still see that, like, even though that didn't come from a place where it was about me, I'm a human. I don't like not being liked. I don't like experiencing rejection. You know, I don't like any of that stuff. So I allowed myself to feel it for a little bit, and then I chose to do something with it, right? And I was like, fuck this. I love this training. These people aren't stealing this from me. So I still do the same things you're talking about, like using those kind of negative experiences to motivate me. But for me, it's also equally important to be able to identify what it is that I'm getting stirred up about. Why is it that this is bothering me so much? Because if I didn't do anything wrong, why am I bothered at all? You know, like, I should just be able to be like, you know, peace out. Like, I don't give a shit what you have to say because I didn't do anything wrong, you know? But like, I still got upset because the human, and maybe, you know, the way that women are taught sort of in our society, and men less so, to look at those things. I just, for me, I guess the long and the short of it is just, it's important for me to be able to identify what's happening, whether I do something about it or not, or sit with the feelings or not, like, is my choice. But I do think male, female, or whatever you identify as, being able to understand, like, where that shit's coming from, why is it upsetting me, you know, like, what is this even about, makes me able to kind of like detach from it more and be like, okay, I can just let you suck, you know, like, I don't have to explain what happened. I don't know about you, but I'm a person who likes closure with situations. I like to understand what happened, and I've had some situations with not just those girls, but some other people over the last few years where the relationship sort of just devolved or ended, and I didn't really understand why. But what all this work on myself has been able to enable me to do is to then say, okay, it's not about me. Because all I ever did growing up, all I ever did when I was younger was blame myself, you know, and say, it's got to be me. Something's wrong with me. I'm different. I'm fucked up. I feel shame about that. You know, all those things, and all that stuff is useless, you know? And so if I can identify that, and I see what the shame pattern that's happening is, and it's because that my brain is literally, you know, as they prove in neuroscience, wired to go certain directions, like, I can be like, oh, I see where that's going. But I can also tell myself now that that's not true. And the brain is an amazingly, what's the best word? Elastic, you know, has the amazing ability to regenerate, right? And to create new pathways and stuff. But in order to do that, you have to do it over and over and over again. So every time, like, something happens, I'm upset, I'm feeling rejected, I'm feeling whatever, I know I'm hitting that shame cycle. And so then I can see it, and then I can redirect it, right? And I can start to direct it back to, okay, this isn't about that. This is about my old thinking pattern. And when you can identify, like, oh, this is just old shit, like, then it starts to reduce the ability of that thought pattern to dysregulate my system. And I don't think maybe men like don't feel it physically as much. I think I feel things physically a lot more than other people. You know, like, my emotions manifest in my body. It's just how it's always been. But like, so I'm not saying like I am saying we need a massive cultural shift in the way that we talk about these things. But I just like, I empathize with the I don't want to call it toxic masculinity, because masculinity is important and it is valid and all of those things, but I would like to be able to communicate to people who identify as male or otherwise, like anybody, that like looking at what's happening and what's going on in your body, like that's how we get to a place where we're able to become the best versions of ourselves and find peace, right? Like, because I can't control, like you said, just all this shit that's been thrown at me. You know, like I had hip surgery 8 weeks ago. I had neck surgery last year. I need a shoulder surgery. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on. I have chronic pain, chronic headaches, all this stuff. So what do I do within all that to be able to have peace and to still be the best version of myself, in spite of the fact that the circumstances of my life do not look like either I'd like them to look because of the way society tells me they're supposed to look, you know? I feel like I just went on a total side tangent there, and that probably, but my point just being like, I think that if we were all able to identify, I'll just speak for myself, I'm not going to say we all, the more I've been able to identify what's going on in my body as things are happening, somatically feeling the change and what does it feel like when I feel anger, where does that come in my body, like it makes me able to ride out the storm a little bit easier because I know it'll end, you know, like, and that's the thing when you go through prolonged periods of trauma or just life, shit happens all the time, right? And the older we get, the more experience we have knowing that good, bad, or indifferent, it'll pass. You know, like it's never going to stay the same. So when you're having a bad day, being like, yeah, this sucks. And it's okay to say it sucks, you know, like, but it will pass. And when you're having a good day, really fucking enjoy that because it's also going to pass, you know, like, and not in the negative, like doom and gloom way, but that's just reality. We all experience that. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. No. And the reason, look, I didn't want to cut you off or anything and interject.
Oh, please do. I'm sick of me.
Because those were good points. And the perspective you have now has shifted because of what you've been through, and that's obvious. And look, no one's like, if someone were to wake up tomorrow with zero eyesight or couldn't use the whole left side of their body, you know, how do you say to that person, well, just suck it up and get better at life, you know, be more competent at something, and that will develop confidence. Look, the stark reality is most people don't go through things that you've gone through, especially all one after another. So there is no magic formula to go off of to circumvent your situation to be better. With that being said, the way that women and men deal with things is different, correct?
Yes.
And
most of the time, yes.
Yeah, and the way that the man would go about this situation currently, not being able to work and not being able to do the things that he would love to do, and not having any cushion to fall back on, I mean, he may do something destructive.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, and here's a theory, I should put this out there. And this is not factual. This is my theory. It's a rather possibility. What if the reason why men don't have so many dysregulatory dysfunctions in their body, or rather dysregulations in their body, is because they've been dealing with this shit they've been dealing with the stressors for millennia, and they've just adapted to it more so than the woman has, because the woman isn't threatened by the same things that a man is threatened by. And so men have evolved to adapt to these particular threats in a way that they don't become dysregulated internally. And they can, I'm not saying they can deal with a lot more, but when interfacing with threat, because we've been dealing with it, and I'm not saying me, I'm just saying men in general have been dealing with it for such a long period of time that they're just now fucking adapted to dealing with this same bullshit. And on average, men live obviously shorter existences than women do, but does it evolve into something like like a cancer, or does it evolve into something like a autoimmune disorder as often as it does with women? If women were to experience the same type of trauma and situations in their life or threat rather, because they're not really made to go through that type of trauma or threat.
It's an interesting question and perspective. And I would say, while there is certainly truth in the type of threats historically have been different, right, for men and women, going back to how like people have evolved from the beginning of time, is like, man is the protector. But I would say that women, and I don't think you disagree with this, and I'm not trying to argue that you are, but that the types of threats that women have experienced, I don't think have historically been seen as valid of threats, because a threat to your body, like, for example, like, I don't know many women these days who haven't had some sort of experience with either assault or, something that's happened to them. But what we've been taught to do is keep your mouth shut, right? Like, because the system is against you, right? I had a personal experience of getting attacked by a boyfriend when I was 19. I made the decision ultimately to talk to a teacher, a professor at school, and because I had bruises all over my neck and it was obvious that something had happened to me, he took me to the campus police. They took me to the police department, and ultimately went through this whole thing. I got a restraining order against the guy. And what ended up happening was that it was dismissed as he ended up having to do like a certain time in recovery meetings as well, because he was really drunk when this happened. But the battery itself was dismissed, even though I got the restraining order for a number of years. The reason I mention that is because, like, what happened is that it was not he said, she said. There were pictures of my physical injuries, but that's not the way. There are certain things, and I think it's shifting, right? The last few years, there has been a major shift with the Me Too movement, with recognizing things that happen to women that are not acceptable, right? Like, I think you'd probably agree. Like, there are just things even now I look back at some of the like sitcoms that I watched in, the 90s or early 2000s, and I'm like, you could not say that on television today, right? Right. But, and the reason I say that is because women, while that may like not be some person coming into your physical, well, it's like women get attacked and have those kind of things happen and are told you're not going to be believed, like, you're weak, keep it to yourself. And so I do think that because, like, yes, we're more emotional beings, a lot of that is because, like, we're not believed. Like, it's a really huge truth in that there's scientific studies about this. Women do get like more autoimmune diseases and those kind of things, but chronic pain issues are so frequently dismissed. Autoimmune diseases take on average 7 years to diagnose in women. And it's because if you come in with pain, like, they're like, I mean, I can't tell you, for years, people were like, you're just depressed, and I'm going, yeah, I am depressed, but that doesn't make me have a claw hand when I wake up in the morning because my hands are so stiff, right? And so I think that women have been sort of under these pressures, but they are different. But it's just kind of how our society has evolved from, like, and so in that sense, I do agree that there is like this genetic component that is probably worn into our DNA because of how long this has all been going on. But I think, like, the idea that men just kind of like tough things out more and are more capable of doing that than women, I don't think it's not true. I just think that the struggles of women have been undervalued or it's not been a huge priority or concern. And so I do think, like, women internalize things a lot more, even though we might be more emotional outwardly and it's acceptable to be. We internalize a lot, like I cannot believe the number of people who, since all this stuff started coming up the last few years, have shared with me stories. I like a story of something that happened to me where I was assaulted years later after this incident. I didn't even know it was an assault until I started like talking about it. And I was like, oh, that wasn't my fault. Like, oh, because I was drunk at the time, like that didn't mean it was my fault, you know? And so it's just interesting. Like I just bring that up because I think men are definitely like, you know, you are told, have this thing happen to you, use that to move forward if you can. But I do think that there is, I can't prove it. I'm not a scientist. I haven't done any studies about this, but like that there's gotta be a correlation with like, why do men die sooner than women? You know, like keeping all that shit in, not processing real physical things that happen. Cause you might, you know, you described that feeling of fear that you had with, you know, when you were a kid, like that, even though it might not feel like it's doing anything to you, it's still there. Like, cause you know, you remember the last name, you remember that experience, and so it's a formative experience, right? And it might not affect you today, but at some level it lives in your cells, you know, which is why you remember it.
Yeah, but I think that's important.
Yeah.
I don't discredit that. I don't want that to not be there. I want that to be there because that's the thing that drives me to be a better fucking man.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't have that, I'd even be more of a fucking pussy.
Yeah.
And that's a disclaimer I put on most men. It's like, you can choose to be more of a man or you can allow yourself to be a pussy. Mm-hmm. You choose. And I already live a cushy existence. So I'm on the spectrum of being more of a pussy. I have to fight like shit to adopt more masculinity because I don't want that, because my hardwiring says so. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say it's okay, be more of a pussy. Nope. It says be more masculine because that's what I've inculcated inside of me. That's what's infused in me, to be more of that. I can't help that shit. It's not toxic. It just is. It just is. Like for my mom, it's in her to want to nurture her children, me as growing up. It's not something that she chose. It just is what it is. Like, I have to take care of this thing because if I don't, he's going to die. So it's just something I cannot describe or rather parse out why I'm that way. It just is that way. And I have a fear of being the other way. And I think that's a good thing for the woman that might get involved with me. I don't think that woman's not going to want a protector or a strong leader to guide her and to guide the household. I do not think that she would want a man to just fucking subjugate himself at any particular point ever, because that's just because he doesn't want to lay down his affirmative law or whatever he believes. Now, that being said, that's going to spark a lot of controversy with people. That's fine. It is what it is. And that is the overarching theme that lives in me and lives in a lot of men. It's like, it is what it is. And I've talked about it on other podcasts. Things are what they are, and I don't try to contort them differently. I just leave them where they are, and I just go about my walk, my day, etc. I'm not saying that that's optimal. That just is life. And so I accept that the way it is. I'm not saying that I want to, it just is. And so when I illustrate for another man like the way that I am, or rather this audience the way that I am, look, I'm not saying that's how you should be. That's just how I am. And I hope to find a woman one day that admires that quality. And if I don't, I guess I'll be single the rest of my life. But I hope to have that one day. I know that there is a spectrum of femininity to masculinity. Understand that. I want to be, in terms of what my wiring calls me to be, I want to be like my father. I want to emulate my father to the umpteenth degree, knowing that I won't even come close to him, but I want to try. That's my fucking pinnacle. That's the pinnacle for me. And so growing up, sorting or rather optimizing a person's, cultivation or evolution. Look, my household, I was blessed to grow up in a really good household. And I had a father that emulated a sense of entrepreneurship rather. And I'm a firm believer in that. That's the only reason why I am an entrepreneur, is because that's what I saw. And so naturally I want to live up to whatever my dad was, because that is my only role model ever. No one else. And so when I look up to him, I think, well, that's what I should do then. But if I saw my dad go to work for another person and bring home a paycheck and live paycheck to paycheck, well, I'm not above my dad. So I would do the same thing. I would have adopted a job and just did exactly what my dad did. May not be in the same line of work, but who am I to think I'm better than my father? And I'm going to outdo my father? Fuck no. If you respect your father, you do not think that way. And you'll forever believe that you'll never come close, even if you grow monetarily higher than him, either in funds or assets or both. You still will always believe you're below him. Why? Because you put him on a pedestal. Why? Because he's your father and you respect him, period.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that I'm clear that I validate everything that you say, and I think your experience is yours, and I think I overuse sometimes the word valid, but I think it's really important for me to recognize that I don't disagree with your experience, because I can't disagree with anyone's experience or feelings, right? Because they're yours. Like, who am I to say you're wrong,
Exactly.
And so, but I think, it's interesting because I did come from a family where my parents, who, they're still married and 40 something years in.
That's so cool.
Which is really cool. And interestingly, they're not going to listen to this, so I can say some things. But like, there are things about their relationship where like they both went to work every day, right? They hated their jobs. They did the 9-to-5. And, they both came from, I won't get into it, but both came from very poor families, right? Very poor backgrounds. So their idea of success, which was drilled into me from when I was little, is financial stability, right? Like, that's what matters. That's all that matters. Work for the guy you hate, do whatever. And to me, I did that. I tried to stay in that forever. And I still love and respect my parents, but I am not satisfied being somebody like fitting into that system that they were okay to fit into, right? And I definitely don't think I'm better than them. I think that I'm different than them, and so even though that's what I saw growing up, like, and for a long time really tried to emulate, at some point I saw in myself this divergence, right? Where I was like, I'm just not quite wired that same way, right? And so they weren't entrepreneurs, and that was, why my dad said, why would you leave a job that pays good money, that does all this stuff? And I'm going, well, I don't want to kill myself. Like, that's why, Dad, and it's really interesting to see, to hear your perspective, because, and especially like you talked about like the masculinity scale and like wanting to be more masculine. And I think, I'm not going to lie, like I'm a very progressive thinker, like I'm probably more of that than some people are comfortable with, but even that being said, like, would I want to be with someone? What was one of the biggest things that attracted me to my husband? He had a very, he was very smart. He had a family previously. He had kids that were, he had raised, and they liked him. And I was like, oh, thank God, if we ever have kids, he knows what the fuck he's doing, because I don't. But like, he had what seemed like stability, right? And that was very attractive to me. And I think that there's nothing wrong with like wanting, I don't think it makes me less of like a, if you want to call it feminism or whatever, to want to have a partner that you feel secure with, right? And like, I've just realized for me that sense of security and protection, like, there's so much more to it for me than just what we think of in the traditional sense of protection, security, safety. And like, one of those things is, so I'm curious, kind of when you talk about wanting to sort of guide a partner or, have them kind of come along with your journey, which I think is so important, by the way. Like, if you are, whatever journey you're on, if you've got a partner and that partner truly wants what's best for you, and that's what they should want if they love you, that's also going to involve like allowing you the freedom to change, right? And to evolve and to grow. And like sometimes that might even evolve to the sense of like, we don't even belong together anymore. And if I truly love you, that means if that's for your best expansion, like you gotta go, like I'm gonna love you through that. It's gonna suck and I'm gonna be pissed at you probably, but I'm gonna love and accept that that's there. But I'm curious just in terms of like, where do we get to a place where there can be some balance between like, it's very, I love the security. I love the sense of, wanting to be a protector, because frankly, what I've been seeking my whole life is safety, right? Because as children, we need to be seen, soothed, and safe. And if you didn't feel those things growing up, that's where a lot of that childhood stuff starts, where you don't feel safe, so you're trying to impress people, and it starts all these patterns as children. But like, where do you get to a place, or I guess I'm just curious how you would feel if you were with somebody who was like, it's really important to talk things out and not just power through it. Like, can you find a place where there is enough of a balance between what your partner might want or need, and in terms of communication and sort of delving into the emotional side of it? Like, can you see the value in that, like in a partnership, as opposed to just being like, okay, well, she's on board for the ride with me. How do I get on board, I guess, with the ride for her, because her road might be different than mine, and like honoring that both are valid, both are important. And in order, like, I'm trying to figure out like how does it work when you have somebody like that, you might just see things differently, right? We all see things differently. Like, we're all individual people. I don't know if what I'm getting at is just that, like, I support what your experience is and how you feel about, you don't want to go to that softer side, right? Like, it's you have been kind of driven to be more masculine, more, just get through it, let it go, move on. I see this bad thing's happening, whatever. Like, how can I use that to propel myself forward? Like, is there value, do you think, in also not seeing it as a weakness or being, as you said, like a pussy, like to actually incorporating that into your life, not to a degree that's uncomfortable, but to a degree that you can also like recognize that might be important to the person that you're with, even if she's not saying it. You know what I mean? Because, I am a strong personality, as you mentioned from the beginning, and I find, it's funny you mentioned that at the start, that, you saw that I could be intimidating. That is something I've been told my whole life. And I've always been like, why? Like, I don't understand, but I get it. Like, I am a big personality. Like, is there a way to kind of balance those things? Or do you see any value in sort of not seeing it so much as like a weakness, or, being less masculine than you want to be, but like really looking inward as to like where this is coming from? Like, do you see value in that for you?
Well, that was the impetus behind this podcast.
Okay.
So in this podcast, I divulge therapeutically. Well, that is sort of aligned with what you're saying. So I absolutely do see value in that, in a relationship with the female counterpart. For me I most certainly want to give her what she deserves. And that I am more apt to do that when she's in her full feminine. Because at the end of the day, this is a merge of a yin and a yang. And you have to be the yin to my yang, etc. If you're not, and we're sort of mucking up the process in which we do things, or rather, you take on some of my masculinity and I take on some of to me, that's very muddy water. And I'm not saying that it can't work. I've never seen it work for anybody in my life and in real time. But in terms of the way that how I would best operate would be if the woman is in her most feminine state, because then that allows me to be in my most masculine state. And we know that works. in terms of the last, I don't know, 200 years or whenever marriage was. I don't know when it was. It wasn't 200 years, probably 100 years or something like that. Where I don't know though. You can fact check me, but it was a short period of time. The onset of marriage, or rather the notion of marriage, or whatever. The point is, I would rather be with a feminine woman so that she allows me to be my masculine man, and that's how we would merge. But what I do here, I guess I'll talk out both sides of my mouth. What I do here is sort of feminine in that regard because I'm in the personal development space, which means everything under the umbrella of personal growth. That's self-improvement, that's mental health, that's awareness, that's identification, etc. Well, all those things in the podcast I divulge therapeutically. So that sort of that's a therapy session, whereas that would be coined by most masculine men a feminine thing. So it definitely is something that I value, and I'm more apt to give it to the woman and be that way just because that's naturally how I am. I mean, I'm that way in this podcast. It's no different than I would be in real life. And that's in part a lot of what my business is centered around. It's not just tutorials on how to squat and lunge and deadlift. It's a lot more than that. It's personal at the end of the day. But with that being said, there has to be a hierarchy. In every relationship, there's a hierarchy. In every business, there's a hierarchy. There's not two CEOs. There's not two leaders in a business. There's not two leaders in anything ever. There's not two presidents. There's always a hierarchy. Whether you want to admit to that or concede to that or not, that exists. I don't make the rules. That's just the way life is. But oddly enough, that's how the chain of command works best. Or rather, that's how these things work best, is through a chain of command. I have to be the head of the chain of command in my household. I have to be the leader. It's not to say that I do not want the ration or the how would I say it? I don't want the valuable opinion from my wife because she's my wife. That's huge to me as well. That's my children's mother. That's the point of one I'm going to be with for the rest of my life, etc. Like, she's very valuable. She does get a say in this. But ultimately, she's got to lend me the stick and say, or the baton and say, look, even though I have my feelings in this, I trust you're going to make the best decision for the household. And that's what I need from my woman. And if that's what I gather from my woman, I will absolutely address anything that she'd like and talk with her and be with her for whatever she. Now, I'm not saying that's contingent upon that. I'm just saying that would have to be ironed out before we even proceed to something very, optimal, like not optimal, but very, I don't know, far in the relationships, evolution as a marriage. I'd have to know that up front. I'd have to connect with her on that level. That's the only way that I'm going to feel like I'm best equipped, or rather I'm best of utility for this woman as she is for me. So in that regard, it's definitely an amalgamation, but things need to have that be in agreement before moving forward. And I guess you get there by playing circumstances out, or playing these little, problem solving in certain areas. And as a man, if a woman is going to be a viable counterpart to you. You're constantly vetting women as a man, at least when you're my age, you are. You're not looking at them just to fuck anymore. You're looking at them as a viable prospect for marriage. And if I'm going to want to lend my hand in marriage with this woman, rather ask her my hand in marriage. So those things are very tantamount to the actual onset of the ask in the first place. I have to figure that shit out, but those things are important to me. And I absolutely would give her that. I would want her. It's not just I give her, I'd want her to be that counterpart to me, and that's what I saw in my parents' relationship. Ultimately, I want my woman to trust me, is what I'm trying. It's a long-winded way of saying I want her to trust me and to trust my leadership skill. And if she can't, and she questions that, then I would go on a limb and say she likely doesn't respect me or admire me in the regard that I'd like her to, or the regard that I would know that would keep her there. She might now be more susceptible to cheat on me or go off in another direction towards another male. If she doesn't fully admire, respect, and trust me, then I don't think that I fully have her. I just don't.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think when you say that, like, you know, to be I think I guess I'm hearing two things, which is like the hierarchy part versus like being a good counterpart, right? And so do you see the relationship, like if somebody trusts you and does trust your leadership and all those things, and you're at that point that you can develop that, is it necessary that it's a hierarchy rather than a partnership where it's like, because I can see where if you have, you know, like I respected, loved, cherished my husband, and you know I made decisions all damn day at work, right? So like I'm gonna
challenge you, because it's always a hierarchy. It's a matter of who holds the highest position. There's always, let me give you an example. You come to a problem, a fork in the road. Well, ultimately somebody chooses where they go. Somebody. You're not just gonna be both lukewarm on shit and then let it dissolve into nothing. You're going to have to make a move somewhere. So somebody holds the hierarchy position in everything in life. Everything. So which one are you? Male or female? Which one in your relationship holds the hierarchy? It always is going to exist. There's an on and off switch, a yin and a yang. There's sunlight, there's darkness. There's always that happening in life. So in that same context, there's always going to be somebody that says, this is where we go. This is the path we choose. You can't just be lukewarm, both parties on everything in life. You won't get anywhere. You'll stay stagnant and never evolve. Nothing will happen and you'll die. Because if you can't choose where to eat, you don't eat.
Yeah.
So there is a hierarchy to this. It's just that word has negative connotation attached to it. And it might trigger somebody when they hear it. Just like masculinity triggers people when they hear it, because they don't understand it for everything that's encapsulated with masculinity. They think it's just like fucking tyrant. I do this, do that. I'm the tyrant. No, it's strength. That's it. And you want to be protected. You want to be safe and secure. You want me to go out and contest with the threat that's beckoning at the door front, right? You don't want it. You want to stay in bed. I want you to stay in bed. I willingly adopt that role. I don't want you, because that would emasculate me. And that's how real men should feel. If they feel anything, they should feel like they're being emasculated if they allow their woman to go contest with the threat as opposed to them. That's really masculinity. And that's a fucking problem. You should not want that. You should want to do everything in your power to oppose that. So that's what I'm trying to illustrate. It's not that I'm against anyone or anything. It's that if I feel, but I don't feel, I just am a certain way, that's the way that I want to be. Because that's what's best suited for my wiring, my DNA. Everything in me that says to be anything says be this and that. If I was to be the opposite, well, I wouldn't be being me. So there is a hierarchy. However, and I'm not saying just you, people in general, the triggering that's associated with that word, because it has negative connotation, because society or culture has kind of sort of highlighted it to have that. Don't allow it to have that. That's just me saying that. But there is a chain of command always. Or again, take it back to the rudimentary illustration. If you can't choose where to eat, you just won't eat and you'll fucking starve.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. I certainly, I like I said, I made decisions all day long at work, and I didn't have any problem like being like, you pick, you know, like I don't want to do that. But I guess, and the reason it probably is triggering, maybe even to me, is because hierarchy to me implies like somebody is going to always have the final say. And it's like, if I feel strongly about something, I want to know that my partner thinks what I believe and what's going on with me is just as valid as what they think, you know. And if those things diverge, like that there isn't like, we automatically, I guess I'm mostly prone to wanting to find the compromise, right? Where it's like, so both people feel valued, you know, like, and both people feel like, I don't feel like I'm shrinking myself into a box. And I do think that our history, this has been this way, the way you're describing has been this way, you know, back to Game of Thrones times, right? Like when women were property, you know, like, and women didn't have a voice. And I think it can be threatening in a sense to hear women say like, no, like, I don't want to be property. I want to be equal in this situation. And so I guess like, that's to me, like I always worked for bosses who, you know, they had the say and whatever. And now it's one of the reasons I want to work for myself, because I don't like being told what to do, you know, like, and I do think that there's a way to find a balance, I guess, between those things.
Well, you do like being told what to do, and let me illustrate why. You came to me for training.
Yes.
Never once did you question what I told you to do.
No.
Okay. Why? Because you trusted me. You trusted me in either my credentials, the way that I dispense to you, anything that I divulge with. You trusted me full-fledged.
Yes.
Okay. That's the woman to her husband. In that regard, she will not question what ultimately his decision is, because she trusts him 100,000%. Now, that's not to say that a good leader doesn't listen to his comrades. Jocko Willink, a great leader, right? Are you familiar with Jocko Willink?
No.
Okay, he's a former Navy SEAL. Former Navy SEAL. He's a badass. Very much a leader. Not only to just this, you know, in terms of the SEALs, but just in general for men, etc. He's a very good leader. Someone, if you don't have somebody that you look up to, he would be a good man to look up to. Now, he would not ever not listen to his comrades or his colleagues. Like if somebody said to him, Jocko said, look, this is what we're gonna infiltrate this unit by doing this. If somebody said to him, one of his comrades came up and said, Jocko, but what do you think about this? Or like, you know, and he thought it might be a better plan, he's going to go along with that plan.
Okay.
Because he listens to, the good leader is always going to listen as well. It's not, like I said, it's not a fucking tyranny.
Yeah.
And that's not how a good leader should operate in a tyrannical aspect. But there's always a deciding factor at the end of the day. At the end of the problem, equation, etc., anything you're trying to solve, there's got to be one way that you choose. And for that, there's always a top in the chain of command. It's just, if you value your partner when it comes to the chain of command in a relationship, you're definitely going to take into account the woman and how she feels about it, etc. But being the man, and you operate with logic and not so much feeling, you have to be able to delineate which is which, and you have to be able to dispense in a very soft way to the woman, to your wife, to your other half, that this is the reason why we're going to do this instead, and make her feel at ease at that. There are multiple scenarios that we could put in place as to how that would go about, but ultimately it's not shunning the partner. It's not silencing her. I don't believe in that. I do believe in approaching her in a soft way, because that's how women will respond best to you, with a soft approach.
Not all women. Some people people take it the other way. And I guess my question, so I did come to you and I absolutely implicitly trusted what you asked that's good English, asked me to do. And that was because of your expertise, right? Like, and I knew that you knew what you were doing. You were in a space where you just knew better than I did, right? So say like if you're in a situation where your spouse like had a legal problem, right? Like in that situation, if we're speaking like you and I, right? I would be the one who has the
Absolutely.
the upper, you know, the more
Absolutely, yeah.
information, right?
Absolutely.
So like in that situation, it's like, okay, well, who should be saying or not deciding, but like who's got the more information to incorporate here? It's going to be the person who's the expert, right, in that
Absolutely.
area. And so I think that to me, I've always just tried to think of, or I guess I've liked the idea of feeling like partnership as opposed to what hierarchy sounds like. And so I'm just trying to kind of incorporate, you know, where you're coming from with also the idea of being a strong, independent, intelligent woman, you know, which I think you want those kind of things like as a partner, right? Like that you'd want somebody who has a backbone and who's going to like, you know, be able to, well, and maybe I shouldn't say that, like be able to challenge. My husband was Irish Catholic, you know, he was Patrick Timothy O'Leary. You can't get more Irish than that. And, you know, he was in a marriage for 27 years before we were together, and he had never, he was very much kind of the role you're describing, much more so than when he met me. And I had a lot of opinions and a lot of, you know, things to say. And we had somewhat of a challenge trying to find where all that fit together, because he was not used to anybody sort of pushing back. But for me, I think he saw it more as pushing back. And to me, it was not pushing back and saying, you don't know what you're doing and I don't trust you. It's saying, let's look at this from all angles, right? Like, and not just say, okay, I'm just going to, you know, sort of tuck my tail and say, you're right. But like, let's really have this conversation and let me lend my expertise, my experience, you know, the way I view the world, and have that be just as valid. And like, is there room for compromise in that? My husband and I were working on that, you know, like when he got sick, unfortunately we didn't get to play that all the way out. But I think it's just interesting. It's like, it's just a different take on, like I love my parents, and like I said, they're still together. And I don't know that I necessarily know if my dad's the one in charge or not about certain things. I think ultimately he kind of was. But for me, like, there's also not a lot of like affection between them. There isn't a lot of, at least I didn't witness that growing up, right? And I don't know if some of that just, there was sort of this like a power struggle. And I think sometimes, to me, maybe in my head, I see if there's somebody who's like in charge, I naturally want to like rebel, right? And I want to be like, I'm going to challenge that. And so, but that you can still have that interplay and that trust with each other, where like you trust your partner just as much as she trusts you. And like, so in that sense, like if she says something, does something, and it, I don't know, I guess I'm not getting to the point of what I'm trying to say, but it's going to be, you know, and I know I could go on with this forever. You're going to have a part 2 with me, but I think that for me, I do like feeling protected. I do like all those things. And at the same time, I think that I've borne a lot of life experience, a lot of things that people my age, which is not much older than you, let's not forget, this is less than a year apart, okay? He's not that much my junior. But that a lot of people my age have not experienced, right? And so I think that I have a lot to contribute, right? And so I guess that's my concern, is anything that suggests that I'm not an equal partner. To me, it grates me, you know, like, because I think I deserve that, you know, like I think I've earned having the respect enough of my partner as well, that like everything I say is just as important, you know, like, and not to say that's not what you're saying. I'm probably just triggered by the word hierarchy.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, like, at the end of the day, man, you and I are friends,
Yeah.
and there's nothing that's gonna change that. So a trigger or not, like it doesn't matter. And like I know that that doesn't make enough impact on you, hold enough impact on you to change our status as a friendship. But the fact is, like, whether we want to admit to it or not, hierarchy exists in everywhere we turn in life, like everywhere. So to say that it's different in relationships is sort of odd, right?
Yeah, I see that. I think that there is absolutely a hierarchy, and I think that's part of what the challenge for me has been as a person who's become more and more aware of just so many power imbalances in the world, in our systems, and the way things are set up, is that yes, there are hierarchies, and sometimes they're useful, but sometimes they're not, like, and sometimes, not to say that they're not valid, but like, do we get to a point where we can reconsider, like, is this the right thing? And this is about everything, not just a relationship dynamic. Is this, we're following this just because it's always been this way, but can we question, is this the best way? And it might, for me, I'm the type of person, it might ultimately come back to it is the best way. But I'm an experiential person. I won't believe something just because I hear it, And so I have to like do that research myself and find back, and I might come back to the exact same conclusion and be like, totally, but I have to find a way. I love hearing what can seem like a really different opinion, but then like sort of picking out those parts and going, well, really, maybe we're not that far off. It's just like the words that we're using may seem more different than they are, and I don't know. I find challenging. I like to challenge the norm, like there's a reason I have purple hair and just got a second nose piercing yesterday,
Well,
like.
And I think it's also Lindsay's hand is the reason why you wanted to immerse yourself in being a lawyer.
Yes.
So whatever wiring you have that's innate to you and supercharge the avenue of being a lawyer and being essentially contentious for a job, that's whatever, whatever caused you to want to do that is whatever caused you to want to do that. Like, but that's not the norm for most females. You understand that, right? Like, if there's a spectrum here, you're on the masculine edge of the spectrum because you're wanting to be that independent, disagreeable, combative, competitive woman.
That makes me sound terrible.
Well, no. But that's reality, and that's how you're viewed in reality to another man. So as a man, this is a man's perspective here, okay? This is it. This is just a man's perspective. I, as a man, know that about you, and I can essentially come to that conclusion very definitively because it's what your job is. I mean, that's what's encapsulated in your job is to be those things, or else you're going to be a shitty lawyer. So, being that as it is, I have to understand that as a realization to your personality, your hardwiring, your character, etc. That's just the way it is. Whatever caused you to want to go down that avenue is the same reason that causes men to want to be gamers. I'm not talking down on being disparaging towards gamers, and just it's not necessarily a very masculine adopted role to accrue money. But you're making money by default. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. That's a good thing. You want to make money by default by doing what you love to do and what you're great at. It just so happens that you're playing video games, which is analogous to what you did when you were fucking 8. You just didn't grow out of it. Luckily, you became elite at it, and there's a whole demographic that's oriented around gaming to where now you can make money on that. But, 15 years ago, 20, whatever, I don't think that was the case, or at least in the 90s for sure.
Yeah.
And anything beyond that. Now, you mentioned, like, you're open to the idea that it might be wrong the way we deal with it currently, and it may be that the way we dealt with it previously was the better way. And look, I often think that. because we live in we live in this environment that's so advanced in terms of tech and progressive. Like, things might definitely be awakening to us, like where, oh, we didn't think of it like that. Maybe that's factual, or maybe there's some truth to that, etc. There may be truth to it, but is it true? That's a whole different story, and that's a whole different podcast. But the fact is, things were still bad when, let's say, Obama was in. Things were still bad when, let's say, Bill Clinton was in. But was it to the level that it is now?
No.
So it's like, maybe perhaps we're evolved to the point where we're too big for our britches, or where we don't really understand how this thing should play out. We really should have kept more conservative back then, because that shit kind of worked in our favor, perhaps. And look, there's things that it might not work for, things that it does work for.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. I think, some of the really extreme stuff that's going on these days is that when you get that swing towards something that is challenging the norm, you also get an equal or stronger swing to keep things the same. And so, like, while, there are certain, I'm trying to not get political because I'll go on a soapbox about that, but like, there are things that, like, in the past were not socially acceptable to say, right? Like, and I think those things were good. So, like, in that sense, I do wish that things were sort of still that way and people weren't emboldened to sort of infringe on people's rights in the way that they do now. But I think, like, I definitely am open to the idea of, like, allowing... I just want everybody's opinion to matter. I want everyone to, and the truth is, it doesn't. Like, that's not the way our society works. But there's that inner part of me that wants it to be that way. And as a lawyer, there are a million reasons that we don't have time to get into about how I ended up going down that path. But do I have a certain talent for... I am a good lawyer, right? I am very logical. That's like how I was trained, right? I am able to see point, counterpoint, come up with things on the fly, all those things. But it's interesting because as much as I'm very good at it, I think it contributed to me getting sick, right? Because I was fighting all the time. And so I'm struggling at this place where I've always been a fighter. I'm always pushing the envelope. And some of that is really good, right? Because it got me a scholarship to college. It got me all these things and, doing as well as I have in my life. And it has also gotten me to a place where at the end of the day, it just messed with my system left, right, and center. And so I'm trying to find the place of how can I be peaceful and also be strong, like how do I do both of those things at the same time? And for me, being strong and looking at, like, I think probably one of the biggest things I've learned from the experiences of the traumas I've been through is that there are certain, and I mean, everyone knows this is not a revelation, but like, there are check the box things that we are quote unquote supposed to accomplish in our lives. There are the milestone markers for, you must get married, have children, buy the house, do the things, right? And nothing is wrong with any of those things if that's what you really want. But I don't think that we are taught to really look for what we want. Like, is that what we really want? Or are we, as I mentioned briefly before we started, like, is that box that we have been told to lay in a coffin? Is that just something that's really not who I am? Like, I think all these skills that I have as a lawyer, like, make me a good lawyer. Doesn't mean that's what I should be doing. But do I think all of those skills are going to serve me in whatever is next? Yes. I don't know what that looks like yet. Do I know that it involves writing a book? Yes. Do I know that it involves, sharing my experience on a wider scale than my Instagram? Yes. And all of those things, like, can come together in a way that, like, we're moving forward and I'm using all those experiences for something better. But I just like, it's it's the fighter in me. It's like I hear certain things and I go, like what was that you just said? But I think everything you've said is totally valid, like, and it's just a different side of an argument.
How often
I guess.
do you speak to men?
Not
Okay.
much.
Which is the reason why these things are sort of triggering for you, probably. Now, the way that what you illustrate about yourself is, it's no reason why you have contention with some of the things that I'm saying, because most women are not logical. Most women are not combative. Most women are not disagreeable. And those are all character traits that define you as a good lawyer, like I just mentioned. So it's no wonder why you have this sort of friendly contention with me, because what I'm saying is I'm basically illustrating what a man is, and you're like, but wait, I'm a female and this is the way I operate, because most females do not operate that way. I'm talking in generalities here, not the anomalies, outliers, etc. For those that are listening, they may be an outlier. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the fucking general populace. Most women just want to get married and have kids and be stay-at-home moms. That doesn't fit well with you, because there is something inside of you that calls you to be different, better than, not better, or rather, because that's putting a pejorative on the women that are just at home, and that's not, because that's a hard fucking job.
The hardest job ever.
Right. But at the same time, you want, I guess, different things in life. So who am I or any man to say that's not the way to be? It's not. It's the way you want to be. And I fully, what's the word? I fully accept that, and not just accept it, like I fully like it, and I'm losing my fucking train of thought. Support,
yeah.
But more than support. Like I totally agree that that's the way you should be. Like, but that's only fitting to certain males. And you've experienced that in real life, going on dates, etc. Like it's a few dates that you have been on, I'm sure, because you're not really that much, unless you've changed. I remember you talking to me about your dates and when we were training together.
I went through a brief and wildly unsuccessful period of dating several years ago, and have not looked back.
you and I alike, but I don't date. So I've been on one date in the last it doesn't matter. So
I got you there. I got you there.
So it's like, it's no wonder to me why these things are sort of extracting themselves from the conversation.
Yeah,
it makes sense. But most of the women that are listening, or maybe not listening, but in life, are not going to think that way. And so, you're definitely an outlier in that regard. And so what comes along with being an outlier is you having a specific narrative that you push, and that's what you believe. And people like me, like you and I, our friendship, our affiliation, I'll never look down upon that. Even if it's not what I agree with for my wife.
Right.
It's something that I respect in you, because I respect the human being that is Lisa. I always have and always will. You didn't think that I already identified these things when I started training you very early on?
No, everybody
absolutely
does.
But
I'm an open book.
Right. Well, it's
people
not
kind of can recognize what personality I have pretty
well
quickly.
The personality, but then the behaviors and the sort of the sort of the navigation that comes along with the wiring. So, but again, and that's why I say it in the beginning, I wasn't trying to date you, so these things didn't hold much weight with me, because it really gave me the ability to just see you for you and not be jaded by any sort of thing that wasn't aligning with my beliefs or my set of, I guess, beliefs, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I think I appreciate that. And to be honest, as a person who, I think I guess here's the thing, and you're right. I believe 110%. I know I'm an outlier, not just as a woman, as a human being, right? I'm called to do different things in this life than a lot of people are, and and again, I have no fucking clue what that ends up looking like. And right now it's cool because I'm like, I don't know, we'll see, we'll try tomorrow, see how I feel tomorrow, you know, which
I'm in
is
the same boat.
Yeah,
I'm in the
which
same
is
fucking boat.
And it can be difficult, but it's also, that's where, you know, that faith of like, well, I have faith in the fact that I don't know shit, so I'm going to just keep going. But I do think that there are a lot of people, I thought I wanted all those check the boxes things. It wasn't until I lost everything, and I started getting stripped away of, you know, my job, my health, my independence, like all these things, that I had to like really look at, are those the things that I want? You know, like, do I want this cookie cutter, not cookie cutter, because that's, again, I don't want to be insulting to people who choose that lifestyle, but I don't think a lot of people question it. You know, I don't think that there are a lot of people who go, you know, who are with their college boyfriend and they're like, oh, well, let me really think about, is this the path I want to go down? It's like, no, this is just what we do. Like, this is, and there's nothing wrong with tradition, and there are plenty of people who are happy doing it. But I also know I have so many friends that are in those types of relationships that have sort of just evolved naturally along the spectrum of, or the road of, this is what we do. And I don't hear much about anything other than like yelling about their husbands and, you know, and people who are just unhappy or who become like roommates with each other, as opposed to like, you know, because it takes work to keep up a real like romantic partnership, especially once kids are involved. And I'm not going to pretend to be a kid expert, because disclosure, I do not have children. My husband died when I was 30, and, you know, things just didn't work out that way. But I ain't, you know, science may call me geriatric at this point, like they say any pregnancy post 35, you're a geriatric pregnancy, and that's fucking rude. And I wish they would change that. But I don't think a lot of people just question it. And I think a lot of people, it's the same way those people who can get along working the job they don't like, just, you know, put your head down. And I think that has been seen as much more valued in society, just because that's what makes you a hard worker, like to have, just to go to work, do the thing, whatever. Whereas the last, you know, this time that I haven't been able to work, it's the hardest work I've ever done in my life. And I'm not getting a paycheck, because I am looking every day at who I am, what is important to me, what is underneath all this shit. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to make me the best version of myself. So if a person comes into my life that fits into my life and it makes sense, like, I'm going to be the best partner in the world for them. You know, like, they're going to be so fucking lucky that I've been through all this shit already, because I can have a disagreement or, you know, whatever, without taking everything personally and realizing that, like, oh, I didn't know that my husband and I could have, I didn't think he was here. This is the thing. We would fight. He used to tell me, stop deposing me. Right. And I would be like, because I would just be like, you have to agree with me. I didn't know that. I thought if he didn't come around to agreeing with me, I thought that meant he didn't hear me, because I was so set in how I thought it was the only way that could possibly make sense. So if you haven't changed your mind to come along with me, you're not listening to me, you know, like, and that is a whole other thing. But like realizing like, oh, okay, that's not how things work. And, you know, I just like to think that with all of this, you know, barrage of shit that's been going on for years now, I think it's most people who would be in my position right now would feel like the biggest failure, right? And I have moments where I feel that way because I don't check those boxes, and I'm still human, and I live in a society that values those things, and they're not invaluable, right? But the fact that I can look at those circumstances and say, this is just what life has handed to me. I'm not going to try to find the bigger existential meaning right now. I'm just going to accept that this is what's happening. And how do I, within all of that, within all the chaos and losing everything, it's a pretty spectacular way to level your ego, to lose everything. How do I become like the best version of myself so that I can go into the world and I can influence people to look at that stuff, to be able to say, the worst part of going through the experiences I've been through is I felt really alone, right? Really alone. I didn't feel understood. And a lot of times I still don't, because I am a different breed of human, but it's at the end of the day, like if I can go into all these experiences and have all these things happen and still say, I'm still okay. I'm good with who I am as a person, even if I don't have the things that's quote unquote, that are supposedly the most important. If I have peace of mind and I can look at you, and regardless of whatever my intention might be with you, with anybody else, and I can say, I will listen to you, I will hear you, I will respect you and validate you, even if we don't agree, or even if we just have different perspectives. Like, what a gift that has been in all of this. I am trained to fight for a living. I am good at fighting with people, this is something that is good for me. But what I want in my life is peace. And if I fight all the time, I'm not going to have it. I love being able to hear you. And even, I hope it's not come off at all as defensive or aggressive or whatever, because I have appreciated everything you've said, and I can take it in and say, this isn't personal about me. This isn't about anything. This is about who you are, what you've cultivated in your life as important, what your values are. And they're no less valid than mine, and what can I learn from you in your perspective, even if it looks a little bit different. And so I just think that's something that's really lacking today, because we've become so polarized as people, that we're on this side or this side and there's nothing in between. I still have a desire to want to understand people, because how else am I going to become the highest version of myself than if I understand and accept people who are different than me, or who see things differently. And I do, dating, not a easy thing. And I've come to the conclusion, people joke about, that saying, I went on this trip and all I got was this stupid t-shirt. I want to say, I went on Bumble and all I got was this stupid restraining order, because crazy freaking dude, whatever, story for another day. But I'm so glad to be in a place now that I don't need someone to tell me I'm okay. I don't need someone to validate who I am and to say I'm lovable, right? Because I know I'm lovable. I know I'm a fucking catch, even if I scare the shit out of people. Probably because I scare the shit out of people and I like to challenge people, right? But I'm not for everybody. And I'm okay with that today. And I wasn't okay with that before. So, as much as I don't want to tie it in a bow because I'm still in the shitstorm, I will say that all of these experiences and going through all of this and having to tear down every belief system that I ever had, and rebuild it and look at it and say, what do I really believe? I'm able to now do that, listen to you, and if somebody came along, like I said, who, first of all, I met naturally, like a human, not just on some app, no shade to the apps, but past experience, not the greatest. I love the fact that I could be single for the rest of my life. Is it what I want? Not really, because I think I'm a really good partner, and I've done a lot of work to be a really good partner. But if that's the way, the shit goes down and I can have way more influence and help more people by staying true to who I am instead of compromising it, then that's where we're at, and I would have never been able to do that before. If my husband hadn't died, I'd still be 0.1ing my life away at a job I hated, compromising my values, because I'd say, well, but I'm getting this external love and validation from my husband, and I'm getting accolades at work. All those things are good, right? We want to have those, but I want to be okay without those. And I had to learn how to be okay without those, or I'd be dead. That's the end of the day. I can't live in a world where I'm just, I'm not enough. I had to figure out how to be enough without any regard to my job, to my relationship status, to my stuff, to my car, whatever, at the end of the day, none of that shit matters, because it can change any day. People don't want to hear that. They want to think that it's not going to happen to them. My husband woke up in the middle of the night after being fine the day before,
had a seizure, 10 months later he was dead, you know? And that is the kind of thing that you can't not change as a person from that. And I wish people could see that, like, just having that compassion for other human beings, whatever they believe, like, even if it's in harsh, you know, I don't have to invite them into my life if it's like super divergent from what I believe in my belief systems and stuff, but I can have compassion for that person because I don't know what they're going through, you know, like I don't know what's happening to them. And just, I don't know. I feel like I've learned to give not only myself grace, but to try to give grace to other people to be who they are, you know, and I don't have to like it, but I have to accept that they're human beings and they're entitled to be whatever they're going to be. And, you know, I will own being intimidating or whatever it is, like, for the rest of my life. I used to hate that word because I'd be like, why, you know, because it seemed like such a negative thing. But I love that you and I can talk like this, and we can have a spirited discussion about things that might look different. And like I said before, now I'm repeating myself, but just that, that ultimately I don't think they're that far off. They just sound different, like, based on the way we've categorized things. And I just tend to like to pick things apart. That makes a good lawyer too, but it also makes a really good writer, you know, like, and it makes a good speaker. It makes a lot of things. And if I had anything to leave people with, the biggest, and not just for women, for men too, but women in particular have been taught to be small, like play small, you know, don't take up too much space. It's like why there's such a huge focus on weight, right, with women, and why I had a eating disorder when I was 19 years old and almost died from blowing out my esophagus, from bulimia. Like, we've been taught to don't make too many waves. Don't test the waters. Don't be disagreeable. Don't be the bitch, right? Like, and at the end of the day, I want to be the best version of myself, whether it makes people uncomfortable or not. Because one of the things I've heard recently that I really like is that, like, the thing that people tell you you're too much of is probably the thing that's going to be the key to your success, because it's the most who you are.
I agree.
You know, does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah. You're like, I'm exhausted.
No, I'm not. No, I'm just listening. And yeah, absolutely, it makes sense. And that's the thing that people will try to dismay you from, because you don't fit in their box.
Yeah.
And so that has obviously some practicality attached to it, you know, in terms of the way you navigate your life and how you should operate and what metrics you should operate off of, you know. So yeah, I mean, for sure. But at the same time, if we're talking about the relationship thing, is something obviously different conversation, you know. And the reality is, if you want to have the ultimate counterpart, you have to learn the ultimate counterpart and how to attract them and what they value. So it's not about just you or what you value. It's about what they value, what qualities they look for. And oftentimes when the woman looks for the man, they don't look for average men. They look for higher value, higher earning men. And those men are rare. Mm-hmm. And those men aren't willing to keep up with a competitive, disagreeable, combative woman. Yeah. They're just not going to. They'll go to a more coachable younger woman, mm-hmm. that's impressionable, right? Yeah. And that rather is okay or just wants the mother and the motherly duties and the keeping of the household, etc. Because really, that man doesn't care about what that woman brings to the table apart from her ability to be feminine. Like, that's it. That's the only measure that a man grades a woman off of. How feminine are you? And the higher the value of the man, the more stringent that grading scale becomes, because he has options. So when you look at it from that avenue, a man that has options because he's created himself to be in the top 3% of all males, he doesn't have to put up with that shit, and he doesn't want to. And that's only going to make for a more chaotic life, which is not what he signed up for, which is the actual, in opposition, what he wants, which is peace. So he's not going to adopt a woman or subscribe to that type of a feminine woman. Now, a average man doesn't have the option. He just has to take whatever the fuck he can get. So in that regard, he'll go for a woman that could put him in line, because he can't even put himself in line. And it's all so evident in what he's not created for his life. The lack of ambition, the requisite discipline that needed to be there to cultivate something more than a 50,000 somewhat per year male is only what he's created. Therefore, he doesn't have options. So the women that are knocking at his door, which is probably one or two, and these are women that he's probably vetted at the same time, he knows that these are his only candidates, because he's competing, which is what males do, with all these other billy goats. And they all got fucking massive horns, and they're at the top of the bluff, and they got all the fucking options. He's down there because he hasn't acquiesced to what it takes to create himself to be a better, more competitive, dominant male, which is exactly what it means to be a male. It's a competition to the top.
Do you think that, I guess, because I don't want to mishear you, like, because I personally would not be interested in, just like I'm a strong personality, I need somebody who's going to challenge me too, right? Like, I don't want somebody who's just going to let me steamroll them. That is boring and unattractive to me, and it doesn't work for me.
Listen.
So that is not the only man available to me.
But listen, that's what you're attracting. And that's what you will continue to attract, because disparity attracts. Similarities do not.
But my husband, just to bring it back to that, he was a very strong guy. He was very, high earner, worked for, he could sell anything to anyone. And
which is the reason why he got you.
Right.
Because you were young, feminine, pure.
But I was the same challenging, independent minded, that I am. And like I said, it was hard for him to adjust to that. But that attracted him to me. He liked that about me until I was his. And then he was like, wow, you're difficult. But
Right. Okay. But the main thing that attracted him to you was your beauty and youth, which is the reason why he swept you up, which is the reason why he can, because he was a higher earning, higher valued male. If he was, if he was your age or only 3 years older than you, which we know that women date up more than that. If he was only 3 years older than you, only made at or about 5,000 more a year than you, and still came with the same personality, he wouldn't be able to get you.
At that time in my life, I think that's true. I don't know that that's true now, because I value things differently than I did before.
Okay, but you're essentially creating the man in yourself that you want. And the actuality of how this plays out in real life is it doesn't. It doesn't play out in real life in your favor, only because a man of the status that you're accruing for yourself is not going to take you seriously apart from sex.
I am rarely at a loss for words. You don't think that men are like attracted to somebody who's got a lot of emotional and intellectual wisdom, and who has, I'm just like, I am not going. Are you just condemning me to be a fucking spinster? Is that what you're trying to tell me? If I continue to try to evolve, that I'm just going to.
Okay, listen.
Yeah, no.
I love you. I really do. And even in our contention, I still fucking love you, dude. Like, there's still so much love in terms of the frequency generated between you and I. At least I feel it on my end. And that's no bullshit. But if this were to play out in real life, I'm not saying all men. I'm saying that in generalities here, most men are not going to put up with it, because they don't need to if they're in the position of the man that you're looking for, unless you're looking for you're able to acquiesce to a male that's average and doesn't have the options. He's going to likely subjugate himself in order to be with you. However, you don't like that, so that's not going to last either. So one of these people has to change.
Yeah, it's not going to be me. I'm just kidding.
Okay, but here's the thing. If you're talking to a male and he's telling you what males look for. Now, this is the general populace of males. It's not everybody.
Right.
And he's telling you that. And if that's something that you deem important to your life and in fact an imperative to live off of, well, then you would automatically think or rethink your situation. But if it's not that important to you, being married, having children, etc., then yes, you steamroll right over it, because who the fuck cares anyway? Because that's not really important to you. Anything you focus on is by extension important to you. Okay, so if you're not focusing on it, then it's just not that important to you. I had a gentleman on here who was awesome at fucking producing music, all that rave music and shit. He's very talented at it. Has yet to do it for for a long time. He just has put a hold on it because of other things that have gone on in his life, etc. Working basic jobs to just get by, meet the requirement to pay his bills, etc. But hasn't put time into that, although he has the time. To me, I don't understand that. Even though it's important to him and he says it is, I say it's not. Because if it were, you'd carve out time off the rip. You wouldn't negotiate with yourself, etc. So if these things are important to you, and it is important to find a higher earning man, but it's still important for you to keep your posture, then you may have to rethink your direction in life in regards to the male counterpart. If it's not important, don't rethink it and keep doing the way you're doing. You, being the female that you are, you could easily be a multimillionaire, easily, and you wouldn't need a man. Yeah. But most women are not you.
Yeah.
So there's I guess that's the saving grace behind all this. You're a one of a kind, and you're so unique in your direction, your navigation in life, and how you think and how you are logical, and also the entire ensemble of personality that you bring to the table. So it's not like it's death for you. You know what I mean? If you don't meet the man, it's not death for you, because I do believe that you are the type of caliber of woman that could be a multimillionaire easily. Which brings me to the point of you writing a book. When are you going to start that shit?
I to be honest, I'd like to say I was dreading this part, but I was hoping you'd bring it up because it's going to call me to the table. And that's why the background of how we joked about me being on the podcast was because you put up a clip of something and it was, like, you have to work at your shit every day. You have to, all this stuff. And I was just like, God damn it. That's what I'll respond. I'll be like, damn it, Justin, do you really need I know, but do you have to say it all the time? And I responded to one of his stories and said, I can't believe you still haven't had the most interesting woman on your podcast, or person. I didn't specify women. But okay, let's not stall on talking about why I haven't done it. The truth is, it's some of it has been health stuff. It's a lot of the issues that I have that I won't get into. There are neurological things that have, whether it's side effects of medication for these various conditions or otherwise. I have issues with double vision sometimes. Sometimes it's just hard. My mind feels very cloudy. I don't feel like I can get out what I need to get out. But I'm getting past the worst of that, I feel like, right now. And what it comes down to is fear. And it's not just fear of failure, because that's there. Like, what if I write a book and it's not well received, or
what if I only have one book in me? How can I be an author? I mean, shit, we've talked for how long now? We're pretty sure I don't have one book in me, right? But like, there's also a fear of success, because that, which might sound ridiculous, because it is ultimately what I want to have. But what I'm used to is living as a person who's restless, irritable, and discontented, right? And I'm a person who is used to being in chaos, who is used to surviving and pushing through and living in fight or flight mode, right? I don't know what it feels like to live in peace. You know, like I don't know like what it feels like to have a dream, put it out there, and it works. Like, and even though that's what I want, it's unfamiliar, right? Like I'm not used to living like that. And so there have been times in the last few months where I thought I was in a deep depression because I felt like I was feeling apathetic about everything. I just didn't have strong reactions to things. And I was like, I was talking to my therapist. She's like, that's peace, Lisa. Like that's acceptance of where, you know, things are. It's not just that you're depressed or you're apathetic. It's just peace. And I'm learning to understand what that's like as well. And I'm a perfectionist. I don't like putting things out that aren't perfect and, you know, whatever. And I think I just have there's just a lot of stuff around it. It's that fear of, what if after all this, I go through all of this, I do the thing that I know that I'm meant to do, because I mean, I'm not tooting my own horn, but you've read my stuff. I'm a good writer. There are a lot of things that I might have, you know, insecurities about in my life. My ability to communicate in writing is not one of them. I know that I'm good at that. And it just comes down to sit down, do it every day. And unless like there's a reason physically I cannot, you know, and I set all these things in front of it, but I got to do this first. I got to do this first. And what if I, you know, just all this stuff, it's excuses and it's fear, you know, but that shit ain't going to get written if I don't write.
You have a computer?
I do, Justin.
All right. So if you have a computer, write a fucking page a day.
I know.
And just do a page a day, and that's it. You can write a page a day.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so let's say you're sick one day and you're bedridden, you can't get to your computer. Okay. But if you're coherent and you're walking from your room to the other room where the computer is, wherever it is in the house, you owe it to yourself to write a page a day. That's not even a year your book is done.
Yeah.
But the thing is that it's going to take more than a year to get your book done. And your first book might be shit. My first podcast was shit. And my second podcast was shit. And further, I mean, I'm going to have shit podcasts all the way up into the fucking 500s, 600s, 700s, I'm sure. But the point is, not this one. But the point is that I'm not stopping, even if it doesn't bode in my favor, or even if I don't see the ROI on it yet, or even if I have contention with something or some person I'm talking to, or some illustration that I'm just soloing about that isn't well received on the other end. Like there's always going to be loud voices, always. But the most loudest voice that you're going to have is your own, saying, you're a fucking failure because you didn't even start.
I know.
At least somebody started, finished it, and then fucking failed. But you didn't even start. And the problem is you're well able. That's the horrific part of this, is you're a well able, very coherent, very logical human being that can easily put words to fucking paper. And if you just parsed it out one page a day, or let's say less than a page, let's say 340 characters, 350 characters a day, that's nothing for someone of your intellect. So for you to pass on that only tells me it's a pipe dream right now, which I'm okay with having dreams, not pipe dreams, because I correlate a pipe dream to it never fucking happening, it never unfolding, and it never becoming a reality. That's a pipe dream to me. I don't know the exact definition, but that's how I illustrate it in my own head. That is not this. This is a massive reality. And here's the thing too. You're just looking at it from the selfish perspective of you.
Yes.
You're not looking at it from the other perspective of the people that it could help and possibly save the lives of. So when you put that type of connotation on it, well, it takes on a whole new fucking meaning.
you're right. And that's the principle of my recovery and my sobriety is about service to other people, right? And like, what do I thrive most in right now and have been for years? It's the advocacy work I do because it helps people. It's the one-on-one conversations I have with people who've been recently bereaved from glioblastoma. You know, it's those kind of things. And what brings that meaning is because I can help them, right? I have experience that can help them. And it is not a pipe dream, but it is something. I mean, this is why I continue to listen to you, Justin. Like, as much as we might have, you know, our theoretical debates about things or whatever, at the end of the day, I respect you because you've always, since I met you, since day one, we have talked about this. We've talked about, you know, you stick with it, and that you and I both know we're meant for bigger things than we might have been doing at the time, and we both still are. But you're doing this, right? Like, and I believe I give myself the grace and compassion of my health stuff is not a joke. It's been very difficult. And, you know, like, I'm still in the process of dealing with a million different issues with that. But is it too much that I can't do anything? No. I showed that to myself a few years ago when I started my blog to begin with, which, you know, was surrendertolive.com. You know, I showed myself that I can do that, you know, like, that's why I started the blog, was to start practicing writing and seeing what I could come up with. And I still to this day continually send those articles to people, you know, like those posts that I did, because they're relevant and they're helpful. You know, like I think the most popular one that's been actually published a couple times is called The Truth About Grief. And it's like, here's my experience with what I was told grief was going to be. And here's the fucking truth, you know, of my experience. And you're right. Like, if I look at this from the perspective of, this is not just about me and what is going to be successful. Am I going to be fear of, you know, this, that, or the other thing? And I think of, what am I holding back from contributing to the world, which ultimately, that's all I've ever wanted to do. I became a lawyer because I wanted to help people, you know? It's not ultimately what I think my law experience is going to be used for, but it got me to the point that I learned how to communicate. I learned how to write. I learned how to argue. I learned all those things, and how to have a job where literally your job is fighting and you have to do it in a kind and polite way and learn to listen. Yeah, I mean, I hear you. And this is why I still follow you, listen to you, like, in what you're talking about, because you tell me the truth of what I need to hear. And even if I don't like it and I want to, you know, give my excuses why it hasn't happened yet. There have been reasons, there have been valid things, and there have also been a lot of things that aren't valid.
No, I know that. Yeah. And I definitely agree with you that those things take a front seat in regards to putting off certain things, because you can't help it, because you're not your 100% self, etc. I also believe that because you haven't had a certain somebody or certain people tell you that, it's caused you to become complacent in what otherwise is your lack of contribution. And I'd argue that your contribution to people is going to be the thing that's going to save you. That's going to be the thing that's going to actually recover you and rectify you. Because the onset of knowing that you're helping others, and once the book is published, and that's going to be a very arduous process, but once it's happened, and once you get that mail coming in from people that have read your literature and identified with it and related to it, and it became so penetrable to them that they applied in their life and they are now better, and you actually saved their life, you can't put a coin on that type of feeling when it's said to you. And most people will go their entire existence and never hear once, "You saved my life." So that's an absolute honor. It's the highest honor that you can give anybody. And that is waiting in the pages that you haven't yet written.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And I know that because of the things that I have written and shared with people. I can't tell you how many people have reached out and have talked to me and say, you know, just how eloquent you are, how well you express yourself. Like, I feel what you're saying. You know, the words you write, I can feel it in my bones. And I do think that all of that is there. You know, it's there for me to capitalize on. There's a reason I have these skills and these strengths. And I do think that there is,
I mean, there's work to be done, and I need to putting the thing on the page, doing the work. That's where I'm at, you know, like, and I have, I don't think even this conversation is going to be what starts me doing it, because I don't like people telling me I'm being complacent with anything, and, you know, and that there's more that I can be contributing, because it is true. I've helped a lot of people in my life, and those are the most valuable moments I've had. And I know that's what was put here on this earth to do. It's just like taking care of my husband was the greatest honor of my life, you know, and it was because I was of service to him. I never thought about, it wasn't, oh my God, my husband's sick, poor me. It was, what can I do to show this man every day how loved he is, you know, like, and that was it was tremendously traumatic, painful, all those things. And it was so valuable. And that is something that is worth sacrificing for. That is if I get to be that person, and I'll say this, that, you know, when I talked about playing it small, where women are taught to play it small, for so much of my life, I've thought, who I wouldn't even say out loud that I wanted to be a writer or that I was a writer. I wouldn't call myself a writer, because it just, who am I to think that I can do that? You know, like, that's just too big. It's just too much. And then I go, who are the writers I admire? Like Brené Brown, Glennon Doyle, like, you know, all these people. And I go, do they really have more life experience than me? That they, you know, they are just on this magical echelon of, or, you know, this trajectory of what they're doing with their lives. Is there any reason that can't be me? Nope. You know, like, aside again from like the health stuff, but I think you know why I think the health stuff has happened? Not all of it, but some of it I think it's random and shitty, but like, because in order to find out what was important to me and be able to deliver all this to people, I had to lose everything, take it all away. And if I hadn't lost my career, like I said, I'd still be there, right? If I hadn't gotten my physical independence taken away, and to a point where like I actually have the time to do these things now, I wouldn't do these things. You know, I had to have everything taken away in order to see what value I brought that was not just what my title was, right? And why is it that we feel like, I don't know, that I feel like need to play it small? Because I'm not built to play it small. I never have been, you know? There's just so much more to my story than this. And I know that, you know, like, and that's why I try to share the experiences of saying, like, I've had shame and guilt and feelings of, you know, insecurity around where I'm at in my life right now. And that's why for a while I wasn't writing, because I didn't want to tell the truth about what was happening, because it was so far outside of what I can control. And there's so many judgments on people who have chronic illness and disabilities and things that are not visible, because you look at me and you think I'm fine. You don't know that like half the time I'm in a room, like I said, a dark room, because I can't even keep my eyes open because I'm in pain. And but all of those things, like, there's just so much more out there. And years ago, in a very deep meditation, I'm not going to say it anyway. It's just the truth. I saw a future, right? And I saw myself living by this particular place where I could write wherever, I could do my work wherever I was. I saw myself speaking. I saw myself like touring places, and I shut it down because I was like, that's ridiculous. Like I said, like, who the fuck do you think you are? I know who I am now. And now I can look at that and say that can be real, you know, like, and I didn't know that. I didn't know I was worthy of that until I lost everything and went through all of this trauma and really dug into it to try to figure out. I believe that God has torn, or God, the universe, whatever, has torn me down in order to prepare me for what my actual purpose is. And I had to lose it all so that I could question, does it matter that I have this traditional standard life? Because I'm not going to have it on that road, you know? And it doesn't mean I'm not going to find a partner. It doesn't mean I'm not going to whatever. It's like, but my purpose is not, if those things happen as a part of the natural course,
cool. Like that, it'd be cool to have somebody to watch, basketball with. Like, that's all I really am interested in, among other things. But like, at the end of the day, like, I'm called to a different purpose than your average person. And that's why I am not the average person. And that's why it's going to take not the average male, but they're out there. Just like I'm an anomaly, there are men who are anomalies and who can be strong and handle a woman who isn't trying to put them in their place, but wants to say, let me have my voice too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
I feel like we could talk for the end
We
of
can
forever,
but we better wrap it up.
I know.
Since this room's getting pretty hot.
I know. I'm like, let's
For people
be honest,
that don't know,
completely
there are
sweating.
massive lights on us right now that are just beating on our skin.
I'm not sweating everywhere. It's fine. I'm not going to stand up from this leather chair and have an entire puddle underneath me. Mm-mm.
Lisa, tell them where they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I do all my Twitter is mostly my advocacy work, but both of them are Lisa O'Leary. You can guess how that's spelled, 524. Which, if you're wondering, May 24th was my wedding date. That's where that came from. You can also find me at surrendertolive.com. That's the blog that I've written a little bit in, but it sounds like I'm gonna be doing some more of that shit. And there's also Lisa at surrendertolive.com. You can reach me there if you have questions or, just you see something on my blog or anything you've heard today, you want to talk about more, engage, challenge me. I'm obviously up to the challenge. So anytime, or if I can be of service in some way in the struggle that you're going through, I just want to encourage people, like, doing it alone is not necessary. There are people out there who understand and who know what it feels like to do it alone. And you just don't have to. And tell the fucking truth. At the end of the day, be honest about who you are. I may have a lot of faults, but you are never going to get anything but who I am. I will not be fake, and I will not compromise my boundaries, like, just to make other people happy or comfortable.
Zero compromise.
Yeah. No, I can, whatever. Another day. Part two. We'll get into that shit.
There you have it. Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate you being here as always, man. This is a pleasure, the conversation. So thank you, and we'll do it again.
Yes,
I'm sure.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you all. If you've made it this far, my God, you're amazing. But we do have a lot.
They
of
have,
because
you're very interesting, and they want to listen to you. You're captivating. So they've listened, I'm sure.
Well, thank you.
Right. Done. Hours, dude.
Shut the fuck up.
Dude, 3 hours. That's crazy.
Nobody's gonna listen for 3 hours.
Oh yeah, they will.
Oh my God. I'm so glad the camera's at least a